In a town forgotten by time, where trouble rides in with the wind and legends fade slower than scars, the weathered clapboards of Garnet Ridge made a sound like old paper whenever the afternoon gusts came barreling down the empty Main Street. To outsiders, it looked like a place that had chosen to drift backward, as if the modern world were a fever it had already sweated out. To Annalise Cade, it was a clock that kept her alive, familiar ticks, predictable talks, and a silence at the top of each hour she had come to trust. The county archive sat in the basement of the old courthouse, a brick cube the color of dried blood, its stone steps warped by 100 winters. Annalise had keys to more doors than the judge and the mayor combined. She wore them on a braided cord at her belt because pockets had betrayed her before flash drives gone missing. A roll of microfilm cracked in two because she'd sat down too fast. Keys did not betray. Keys simply waited, teeth bared, until, asked to bite, she swiped in at 8:12 a.m. Because at 8 sharp, the custodian liked to complain about the state budget to whoever was within range. And at 8:05 the elevator coughed its way up from the basement, like a smoker who'd promised to quit but hadn't. At 8:12 there was only the hum of lights and the smell of paper, leather glue, and dust, the perfume of a quiet life. Her desk was a metal relic rescued from a school that had been torn down years ago. She ran a hand over its scars. Every groove held a story, someone's initials carved in 1978. A cigarette burn that had bubbled the paint. A dent from a long ago slammed drawer. Annalise liked objects that confessed what they'd endured. People who did that were rarer. She opened the day's requests. A veteran who needed a certified copy of a deed. A grad student who'd emailed about uranium leases. A genealogy enthusiast who suspected his great-grandmother had been married 3 times to the same man. Routine. Safe. She stacked the forms, clipped them into a neat tower, and reached for the ledger where she recorded every movement of every box. The pen twitched in her fingers. The twitch wasn't in her fingers. It was deeper, stranger. A tremor under her collarbone, a vibration so subtle she thought at first she'd imagined it. She pressed her palm there, beneath the gray knit of her sweater, and felt it again, 4 faint pulses, evenly spaced, like the distant thud of a bass drum through 2 walls. Her mouth went dry. She glanced around the room, as if someone might have stepped out of the stacks to say surprise. But the aisles were empty, the rows of shelves aligned like soldiers, acid-free boxes ranked in gray. Somewhere a temperature regulator clicked. The world was exactly as it should be, 4 pulses. Then nothing. She closed her eyes and counted to 10, the way the physical therapist had taught her after the accident. Breathe in, count. Breathe out, count. She hadn't told the therapist that the counting was older than the crash on Highway 23. That she'd learned to count in another language before she learned in English. That she remembered the numbers by taste: 1 like copper, 2 like pennies rubbed between fingers, 3 like snow on the tongue. Her phone buzzed. She flinched. It was only a text alert from the weather station. High wind advisory. The corner of her mouth lifted. I know, she told the empty room, the way people talk to pets or the dead. I can hear it. She set the phone face down and opened the ledger to the most recent month. The handwriting there was neat but unremarkable. Cade, a box 14 to 82, deed books Lyon. Cade, a box 103, assorted municipal permits. Cade, a box 39 to 74. She paused. Her pen hovered. 39. She did not move for a heartbeat, then another. She hadn't written that entry. She hadn't inventoried a box 39 to 74. The handwriting was hers, but not hers. The way you recognize your face in a window at night, familiar. Distorted by glass. Her fingers, steady by habit, turned the ledger back 3 pages, then forward 5. No 39 to 74. The sequence jumped from 39 to 73, tax rolls. 6870 to 4001. Voter registrations, 71, 72. There was no space where 39 to 74 should have been. Yet here, on this page, her script had agreed it existed. She traced the line lightly. The way museum conservators touch oil paint with the back of a knuckle to test whether it's set. The paper was cool. The ink was dry. The entry was real. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." She stood. The vibration did not return. She felt instead a pressure behind her left eye, a bloom of heat beneath her collarbone where the skin was faintly ridged. The scar there was older than any story she ever told about it. Childhood bicycle. Surgery when she was too small to remember. A confused nurse in an emergency room who had stared at a scan and then at Annalise as if she were a trick of light. She crossed the room, turning sideways through the gap between two rolling shelves, and entered the aisle that held the 39s. Her breath slowed as it always did when she stepped between these rows. The air felt different in the stacks, tamped down by decades of silence. Box 39 to 71, 39 to 72, 39, 73, 4001. The shelf below held older registers, their spines red like dried cherries. The shelf above offered a row of county maps smelling faintly of mildew. No 39 to 74. You imagined it. Her mind said it without malice. Living alone taught you to cut your own food and to cut your own illusions, but her fingers refused that verdict. They walked along the shelf lip until they touched an edge that felt wrong. A seam where no seam should be, she pressed. The sound was small, a click like a throat clearing. The back panel steel, not wood, trembled and parted by a hair's width. "Not possible," she whispered, though a different part of her, the part that remembered numbers by taste, said, "Or exactly possible." She pushed again. The panel slid inward 3 inches and then stopped. The smell that spilled out was its own calendar. Cold oil, old paper. A ghost of ozone dot under her collarbone. 4 pulses. This time she didn't mistake them. They were not nerves or imagination. They were a call and an answer, a primitive conversation repeating a phrase no one else in the world knew. Her fingers felt clumsy around the keys at her belt. She did not need them. The latch inside the secret panel was a puzzle made for a specific hand. Not hers, and yet her hand found the first lever without looking, the second with an angle of the wrist that made her bones ache with a memory not her own. Click, click, the steel back slid open with a sigh. A breath colder than a basement should ever breathe washed over her face. The space behind the panel was narrow, no more than 2 feet deep, and full of boxes that were not the county's gray but a deeper slate, labeled in a meticulous block. Hand she did not recognize. Winterglass. She said the word aloud, and it left a grit in her mouth like ground quartz. Her breath fogged in front of her, even though the archive thermostat glowed a steady 60-9. She should call Sheriff Oates. She should lock the panel, back away, pretend the ledger had played its trick and she had never pried. She should pretend to be exactly what she had planned to be today, a woman who filed things no one else wanted to remember. Instead, she slid the nearest box forward. It was heavier than it looked. The lid resisted like a stubborn lid resists coffee cans in the morning when you don't want to fight. She found the corner that would give, holding it the way you hold a bird you don't want to scare. The tape hissed. She lifted. Inside lay a roll of microfilm in a sealed tin, a packet of typed memos bound with faded green twine, and a small cube wrapped in waxed paper. The cube clicked against the tin as she moved it. No, not a click. A pulse. The memos were stamped in red. Declassification. Prohibited. Another stamp in a different ink bled across the page. Property of Federal Civil Defense 1963. But the paper stock belonged to a later decade. She flipped the first page and saw her breath tremble. Winterglass. Archival Interface Protocol Region 6. New Mexico Subindex. Site Pillar -6. Under that, Typed like an afterthought and then X'd out with ballpoint. Agent of record. Cade, as she sat down on the cold concrete without deciding to. The chair she should have pulled from her desk was 40 feet away and belonged to a different mood. The floor belonged to this one. Someone had typed her name into a document older than she was. Or someone had typed a name that matched hers. Or someone had taught a younger self that this was her name before a different name took its place. Her throat tugged. She swallowed. Not today, she told the tug. Not tears today. There were forms to file. There were veterans who needed deeds. There were numbers to count by taste if fear required. She folded back the cover on the memos. A list of names bled. Upward Cody names, some in Russian transliteration. Some nonsense syllables that nonetheless felt familiar, like a song you pretended not to know. At the bottom of the first page, a directive. Upon activation of Beacon Series, Murex 39, Field Agent to initiate Site Pillar 6 Reiki procedure. Activation criteria. Elapsed time 39 years. From Cold Archive Burial OR receipt of signal chain. Echo Pilgrim from Central. If both occur no later than plus or minus 72H window. Agent of record to proceed without instruction and without expectation of retrieval. The waxed paper crinkled. The cube within it pulsed again, thrice instead of 4. Thud, thud, thud. She unwrapped it with slow fingers, the way she had unwrapped her casts after the accident, one layer, then the next, as if haste might snap bone. The wax flaked and the cube lay naked in her palm. It was not a cube. It was a badly disguised locket pretending to be a cube. Dull metal, no ornament, a seam hair thin along one edge, and a weight that made the tendons in her wrist complain. When she turned it, something inside slid like ball bearings finding. A groove, the seam widened. A sliver of red winked, the room swam out of focus. Her chest knew that red before her mind admitted it. Another world. Another time. Another word she had stored like a thorn. Murex. She closed her fist around the locket and the pulses ceased. Her scar burned steady, a coal under skin. She hadn't felt heat there since. Since ever, she corrected herself sharply because she did not remember, because remembering was a luxury that lived in other people's stories. A shadow moved against the glass of her office window. She looked up. It was only a cloud shouldering past, dragging light from the room as if it were a soft thing. When the cloud freed the sun, the light returned in pieces. The memos detailed procedures the Cold War had made boring by repetition. How to access a vault without tripping a countermeasure. How to read a punch tape without a reader. How to turn a map into a cipher by folding it along roads no longer paved. It would have been thrilling if it hadn't also felt like a set of instructions for dying slowly in a place no one would think. To look. If Site Pillar 6 remains intact, Reiki by matching the Murex locket's pulse to the vault's residual field. Do not attempt to force open. Do not cut. If Site Pillar 6 is compromised by demolition, salvage microfilm and transmit via HF per Schedule Appendix C. If both asset and site are compromised, memorize catalog frames 17 to 64 and destroy. Film, then proceed to Site Pillar 7 only if Elk White clears by Morse at 10.113. It was not the jargon that chilled her. It was the voice behind it, confident and tired, as if the writer had believed the world would end in paperwork before it ended in fire. Annie? The voice came from behind her shoulder and split her in two. The woman who hated that nickname. And the woman whose bones answered to it before her head did. She stood too fast and her knee barked a complaint. Sheriff Cal Oates filled the doorway like a porch post, wide and sun-cracked and sturdier than he looked. His hat was in his hand, which meant he was about to ask a favor. "Hey," she said. Her own voice stepping on itself. "You scared me." She turned so her body broke the sight line between him and the open panel. He glanced past her anyway, cop brain sweeping the room, never not counting exits. "Sorry." He softened the word with a smile that time had chipped but not broken. Phones are acting up with the wind. Figured I'd deliver this in person. He held up a manila envelope. Got a request from some foundation back east. Want access to Cold War records, missile evacuation plans, siren tests. Got your name on it. Her fingers hesitated before they took the envelope. What foundation? Something with a hyphen. I don't know. He hooked a thumb toward Main Street. Don't suppose you've seen the Hughes boys today, have you? Their mother says they didn't come home last night, and if they've dinged up that dirt bike again, I'm gonna tan there. He stopped. The pause was not long. It was long enough to file under noticed. You okay? Fine. She stretched a smile across her face like plastic wrap. Just cold. The thermostat is being dramatic again. He peered at her over the hat brim, weighing truths against ease. Cal Oates had been a good high school tight end. He'd been a better soldier. The Army had given him a scar and the habit of staring at a person's shoulder when he didn't want them to see his eyes. He was staring at her shoulder now. You sure? His voice gentled. You're pale. I spend my days underground, she said lightly. We don't get sun down here, he grunted. He didn't buy it, but he was merciful. All right, holler if you need anything. I'll be in and out winds kicking up fences like there. Nothing. He tipped the hat without putting it on, which meant he'd be back before lunch. His boots went up the hall and down the stairs, and the building felt briefly heavier, as if his weight had been the wedge that kept it from sliding off its foundation. Annalee stood, until her breathing matched the hum of the lights. Then she slid the winter glass box back into the hidden slot. She didn't seal the panel. She closed it enough that a wandering eye would not notice a shadow that did not belong. She took the manila envelope to her desk. The scan code on the front was a style nobody used locally. The return address bore a name that was neither a hyphen nor an M-. A.S. Klein Foundation, O.H. Decker Hawley. Director, Field Acquisitions. Her hand went colder than the breath that had spilled from the panel. She knew the name without knowing why. Herbert Decker Howell. At least 3 pieces of his name sounded like they belonged to government furniture. She slid a knife along the tissue seam. Inside lay a single sheet on expensive paper, a USB drive, and a Polaroid that had yellowed as if someone had held it under a lamp until it browned. The letter's tone was a handshake that squeezed too hard and then apologized for it. The foundation represented cultural preservation interests. They wished to sponsor a digitization of county civil defense, records from 1960 through 1991. They would compensate the county generously. They sincerely hoped to partner in the near term. The USB contained examples of their past projects. The undersigned would be visiting Garnet Ridge on Thursday to discuss logistics if that suited Ms. Cade's schedule. Thursday was tomorrow. The signature belonged to someone who wrote their name often. H. Decker Hawley, in a precise hand that tried not to look military and failed. The Polaroid did not belong to the letter. It belonged to her skin. A girl stood in a room with cinderblock walls. The girl was 8 or 9. She wore a white dress that did not belong to her body. It had been put on her the way you put a towel on a wound. A woman in a lab coat stood behind the girl with one hand on her shoulder. The girl was not crying. Her face had the careful blankness of a child who has learned that adults are proudest of you when you forget to need. The girl could have been 100 girls, except for her eyes. A dark ring around light irises, the color of storm glass. Eyes she had seen once in a mirror, when the morning light hit at a certain angle and she'd startled at her own reflection. On the back of the Polaroid, someone had written in a blocky hand, MUREX, Series 39 Archive Orientation Subject. Annalise did not sit. She did not stand either. Her mind wavered above her shoulders, and the room tilted to stay under it, like a husband steadying a bride after a first dance gone wrong. She pressed her thumb against the photograph's edge. Her pulse kicked once, twice. 4 pulses under her skin answered. She reached for the locket without looking and felt it hum against her palm. The scar under her collarbone warmed as if a tiny stove had been lit inside her. The hum grew into a sequence, 4 and 3, and 2, a pattern that was not random, a pattern that meant now. Her phone vibrated again. Second alert from the weather station. Gale warning extended. The wind outside found a loose sign on the courthouse lawn and banged it against its post until the sound mapped onto the pattern in her chest. Now. She put the locket and the Polaroid in her sweater pocket. She packed the winter glass memos into a messenger bag along with the microfilm tin. She stood, turned off her office light out of force of habit, and locked the archive doors behind her. The motions were automatic until they weren't. At the elevator, she paused and took the stairs instead. If the building trapped her between floors today, she would claw through the ceiling like an animal. Outside, the high desert sky wore a bruise at its western edge. Dust climbed out of the far ravines and came into town as if it had a warrant. The courthouse lawn had been mowed yesterday. Today it was a hayfield of papers and leaves. Sheriff Oates stood by his truck talking to a rancher whose beard looked like a tumbleweed that had lost its way. He saw her and lifted his chin, not a question this time, just a presence check. She tapped the messenger bag and made a circle with her finger, going to the stacks at the highway depot. He nodded and mimed a phone with his hand next to his ear. She showed him her phone and made a face, dead battery. Half lie, the battery was fine. The rest was not. Her car was an old Subaru with one blue door that had come from a different Subaru. She turned the key and the engine turned the question over twice before it found an answer. She put the car in gear and did not look at the rear view. She had promised herself long ago that she would not become one of those people who plotted escape routes every morning just to make toast. Today the toast would burn on its own. Garnet Ridge lay in a shallow bowl with a chipped rim. 10 miles. East the land climbed to a line of hills stitched with juniper and scrub. She took the county road that hugged the bowl. At mile marker 6 the road passed a rusted gate with a sign that said, "No trespassing," and another that said, "County Storage." The second sign had been added later in different hands. 2 storage buildings. Squatted on the lot beyond the gate, long low, eyes half shut. They held road salt and hurricane fencing, old voting booths and broken chairs. Annalise had a key. She swung the gate, drove in, and let it fall behind her with a clang that made the birds startle from the eaves. She did not go to the buildings. She went to the chain-link fence behind them where the land fell away into a wash thick with rabbit brush. The fence had a place where someone had repaired it badly. She knew that place the way a tongue knows the notch in a tooth. She crouched and eased the bottom edge up, scraped her elbow on the ragged end of a wire, and belly crawled under with a grace that did not belong to a county archivist. The wash was deeper than it looked from the lot. She slid down the sandy slope, caught herself on a root, and stood in a dry riverbed whose stones were a polish like old coins rubbed by 100 thumbs. The wind ran fingers through the brush, and the brush answered in whispers. She followed the wash for 2 bends, 3 bends. At the 4th bend, a concrete wall rose where no wall should be. Its face were the graffiti of weather and teenagers in time. In the center, half buried under sand, a steel door lay like a tomb lid set wrong in its frame. "Cite Pillar 6, she said, because sometimes saying a thing pulls it fully into the world. The word hung without echo. The wind held its breath. She brushed sand from the door with her sleeve. The metal was colder than it had any right to be after a morning in the sun. The seam around it was clogged with grit and the husks of dead insects. At the right-hand edge, a square of metal thinner than the door itself tilted slightly outward. A reader, not for a swipe card. For something older. She placed the locket against it. 4 pulses under her collarbone, 4 pulses in the locket. A third rhythm joined, low and patient, like a heart that had been sleeping a long time and was not ready to wake. The door did not open. The reader did not light. But the air changed, charged like a thunderhead you smell before it breaks. "Come on," she said softly, to the door, to the locket, to the part of her she had not invited, but who had come anyway. "Please," the locket warmed. It had no right to. The metal spread the heat like water spreads dye. The reader clicked. The click was not a latch. It was a throat learning a word. Behind her, gravel scuffed. She didn't turn. She kept the locket pressed and let her eyes move without moving her head. The wash had two entrances. Both lay in shadow now that the sun had rolled behind a cloud. A shape made of dust and angles hesitated at the nearest lip. Then boots slid down Miss Cade. The man's voice was the temperature of boardroom air conditioning. He landed light, as if gravity owed him favors and paid them back on time. What a stroke of luck. She did not answer. The locket hummed. The scar sang back. "Herbert Decker Hawley," the man said, not offering a hand yet because the terrain did not allow for civilized rituals, and also because he preferred to pretend he was above them. It seems we're both punctual. He wore a suit that wished it were a uniform. The tie was dark. The shoes had dust on them he'd pretend not to see. His hair obeyed. His eyes did not belong to this place. They belonged to rooms with 3 locks. And conversations with more exits than participants. "Your foundation must have good directions," she said. Her voice belonged to a different woman, smoother, thinner. The wind had ironed it. "Your county is fortunate that we do," he replied. "Cultural preservation requires speed." Dust, he looked up as if to scold the wind, is the enemy. He advanced one step, then another, keeping his feet well away from the door's edge, as if a line of powder had been poured there, and he knew not to cross it. He glanced at the locket, not quite looking, the way you glance at a person's scar, without letting your eyes betray you. "Strange place for a vault," he observed. "I would have expected your archive to be upstairs." "In a courthouse with flags." Her grip on the locket tightened. "This isn't a vault, no?" His smile made nice with his mouth and not at all with his face. "What is it, Miss Cade?" "Garbage," she said. "County dumps old equipment wherever there's a hole." He let the syllable hang like bait. "Shall we tell each other true things, Miss Cade?" "I'll go first. I'm not a preservationist. I work with them. Sometimes I help them. Often, they help me. And I am here because something woke up that should not have." The locket pulsed in her palm as if to punctuate his sentence. 4-3-2. The rhythm was changing, winding itself toward a knot. "Here's another true thing," he said, as if they were swapping trading cards. "You were not born Annalise Cade." Her smile cut itself on her teeth. "Neither were you. Nobody is. Born with initials stamped on their stationery." A fair point. He examined the door the way a doctor examines a bruise that isn't on his own skin. "I don't know what they told you, if they told you anything at all. You were a file once. A file that went missing and then, by a miracle of bureaucracy, was rediscovered. I'd like to help you put it where it belongs." "And where is that?" She already knew his answer. She wanted to hear how he would sell it, in a climate-controlled environment, he said, with proper cataloging. He looked at her finally, eyes steady with a salesman's sincerity. "Safe." "From whom?" "From yourself." She let the silence sit. The wind picked at the corner of the locket with a cold finger. The reader clicked again, a little louder this time, like a child finding its own voice. "You're early," she said. "Your letter said tomorrow. I wanted to see what you would do if I gave you a day to pretend." He breathed in as if the air itself had a file he could read. "You're brave. Or you're tired of being polite. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes," his smile thinned. "You should step away from the door, Miss Cade." "No." She surprised herself with the shape the word made in her mouth. It was an old shape. It fit too well. He shifted his weight back a fraction, as if to say he had tried civility and would now try something else. I'm the only person in 100 miles who knows how to open that without getting you killed, he said softly. Not true. Her eyes did not leave his. There's at least one other. She pressed the locket flat. The pulses doubled. The reader answered with a low tone that settled into the base of her spine. He exhaled through his nose. You won't like what's inside. Neither will you. Then we are agreed on one thing. He nodded. She did not answer. The locket hummed. The scar sang back. Herbert Decker Hawley, the man said, not offering a hand yet because the terrain did not allow for civilized rituals, and also because he preferred to pretend he was above them. It seems we're both punctual. He wore a suit that wished it were a uniform. The tie was dark. The shoes had dust on them he'd pretend not to see. His hair obeyed. His eyes did not belong to this place. They belonged to rooms with 3 locks. And conversations with more exits than participants. Your foundation must have good directions, she said. Her voice belonged to a different woman, smoother, thinner. The wind had ironed it. Your county is fortunate that we do, he replied. Cultural preservation requires speed. Dust, he looked up as if to scold the wind, is the enemy. He advanced one step, then another, keeping his feet well away from the door's edge, as if a line of powder had been poured there, and he knew not to cross it. He glanced at the locket, not quite looking, the way you glance at a person's scar, without letting your eyes betray you. Strange place for a vault, he observed. I would have expected your archive to be upstairs. In a courthouse with flags. Her grip on the locket tightened. This isn't a vault, no? His smile made nice with his mouth and not at all with his face. What is it, Miss Cade? Garbage, she said. County dumps old equipment wherever there's a hole. He let the syllable hang like bait. Shall we tell each other true things, Miss Cade? I'll go first. I'm not a preservationist. I work with them. Sometimes I help them. Often, they help me. And I am here because something woke up that should not have. The locket pulsed in her palm as if to punctuate his sentence. 4-3-2. The rhythm was changing, winding itself toward a knot. Here's another true thing, he said, as if they were swapping trading cards. You were not born Annalise Cade. Her smile cut itself on her teeth. Neither were you. Nobody is. Born with initials stamped on their stationery. A fair point. He examined the door the way a doctor examines a bruise that isn't on his own skin. I don't know what they told you, if they told you anything at all. You were a file once. A file that went missing and then, by a miracle of bureaucracy, was rediscovered. I'd like to help you put it where it belongs. And where is that? She already knew his answer. She wanted to hear how he would sell it, in a climate-controlled environment, he said, with proper cataloging. He looked at her finally, eyes steady with a salesman's sincerity. Safe. From whom? From yourself. She let the silence sit. The wind picked at the corner of the locket with a cold finger. The reader clicked again, a little louder this time, like a child finding its own voice. You're early, she said. Your letter said tomorrow. I wanted to see what you would do if I gave you a day to pretend. He breathed in as if the air itself had a file he could read. You're brave. Or you're tired of being polite. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes, his smile thinned. You should step away from the door, Miss Cade. No, she surprised herself with the shape the word made in her mouth. It was an old shape. It fit too well. He shifted his weight back. A fraction, as if to say he had tried civility and would now try something else. I'm the only person in 100 miles who knows how to open that without getting you killed, he said softly. Not true. Her eyes did not leave his. There's at least one other. She pressed the locket flat. The pulses doubled. The reader answered with a low tone that settled into the base of her spine. He exhaled through his nose. You won't like what's inside. Neither will you. Then we are agreed on one thing. He nodded once. Proceed. It was not permission. It was an admission that some trains do not stop for hand signals. She shifted her grip, turned the locket's inner seam with her thumbnail until the red sliver widened, and felt something. Delicate inside a line with something she could not see. The reader's tone lifted by a note so small it felt imagined. The seam in the door whispered dot from up on the rim of the wash. Tires crackled on gravel. Decker Hale's eyes flicked up. Company, he said, not unhappily. A white county van rolled to a stop where the chain-link fence met the ditch. The seal. On the door said Public Works. The man who climbed out did not look like he repaired roads. He looked like he repaired men. He carried his hands like a prizefighter loose until they weren't. Afternoon, he called, in a voice that belonged to a man who sold feed or faith. Wind's hellish. You folks lost? Holly looked almost amused. You sent him? I didn't send anyone, she said. The locket thrummed. The door answered with a sound halfway between a moan and a chime. The man from the van slid down into the wash, boots finding holds on rock as if his feet had known this slope before. He smiled, showing molars that didn't match the front teeth. One repair and a mouth full of expensive maintenance. His eyes never left her hands. Ma'am, he said smoothly. Sheriff asked me to come check the fence. Cattle got out last week. You know how it is. Everything winds up where it shouldn't. Like you, she said. He laughed, delighted she'd given him the ball to run with. Exactly like me. He tipped an imaginary hat. Name's Kellen Gray. County contracts. I fix things no one else wants to think about. He let the sentence hang and then reached into his back pocket and brought out a folded piece of paper. He offered it to her, arm extended, not moving closer than the invisible line near the door. Got a work order, says there's a broken latch on a county vault down in the wash. Looks like I found it. She did not take the paper. If she took it, she'd have to look at it. If she looked at it, it would belong to her. Holly didn't move. Miss Cade, Holly said, something new in his voice now. The careful cadence of a man putting his foot down on a rung he hopes will hold. Stop, keep going, Gray said, because if Holly said stop he would say go, if only to avoid agreement. She pushed. The door, irritated now by its own inertia, rolled another 2 inches. Enough for a shoulder. Enough for a body thinner than hers to slip through. Enough for her to be no one's client. A bell rang, distant and small. The kind of bell that means come to the table. Dinner is ready. The world is safe. It was the bell in her chest. She slid sideways. One shoulder in, then the other. The messenger bag catching on the jamb and then following. She put her solace on a floor that should have been soft with rot and found it hard, as if the last person to leave had swept their footprints from it and then told the dust to stay put. Don't. Holly said again, softly to himself, like a man telling a dog not to chase a car it will chase anyway. The light behind her reached long fingers along the floor and picked up a shape near the door. A boot. Its heel pointed toward her. The leather had dried the way apples dry if you leave them on a windowsill, collapsing in on itself, preserving its own ghost. Her stomach tightened. She squatted without meaning to and touched the boot with the back of her knuckle. It didn't crumble. It resisted like old things resist, stubbornly, with a refusal to please. Something about the angle of it was wrong. The heel pointed toward her, which meant the toe pointed into the room, which meant whoever had worn it had been facing away when the door closed, which meant the soft thing that had stopped the door was not the boot. Miss Cade, Holly said for the 3rd time, now not soft at all. Don't move. She looked up. The light made a strip along the floor that ended in another shape a foot farther in. The shape read as fabric and then did not, the way clouds read as animals until you name them and they go back to being wind. She crouched, extended her fingers again, touched careful as if the thing could bite, and felt the give of flesh beneath leather. A hand. shrunk by cold and years, but still a hand, glove cracked and flaking. It lay as if someone had reached back at the last second to stop a door that did not want to be stopped, and the door had not cared. "Back out," Gray said, and for the first time there was not swagger in his voice, but something like a man who has seen what doorways do to people who are on the wrong side of them. Now, something on the folding table moved. No, not moved, flickered. A red dot the size of a pinprick winked once, twice, as if a thing no one had fed in decades had found a crumb and was pleased. The locket in her palm pulsed in answer, the same cadence. Then faster, like a heart warmed by running, a sound rose through the room. Not a siren, not the groan of old machinery. A voice. It came from a speaker somewhere above the bulletin board. It came in on a flood of static, molded itself into syllables older than the county and the courthouse, and every version of her name. She did not think in Russian, not aloud. The word still printed itself on the inside of her teeth. Murex 39. Confirmation. The voice coughed in static and turned itself into English. Murex Series 39. Confirmation beacon received. Awaiting key phrase. Her mouth went dry the way deserts go dry when rivers change course. She pulled air into lungs that had forgotten how. She dragged a word from a drawer she had nailed shut with her own hands and spoke it before she could stop herself. Elk. White. The syllables scraped like flint. The speaker clicked. The red pinprick on the table brightened. Key phrase. Received. Agent of record. Cade. A status dormant. Reiki procedure initiated. Warning. Intrusion channels active. Countdown 90 seconds. Hale's hand, fast as breath, closed on her upper arm. Gray's shadow jumped as he moved to the door. The wind found its voice again outside, as if the world had been holding its breath and decided it had waited long enough. "What did you just do?" Gray asked, very calm. "I woke it up," she said, and her voice sounded like a stranger's, like the way a voice sounds when you call your own number and leave a message and then hear it later and refuse to believe it belongs to you. Hale's fingers tightened. "Then you're not walking out without it." "Without what?" she asked, and the speaker answered her instead. Winterglass node engaged. Deliverables prepared for extraction. Warning, external access detected. Defensive protocol may engage. May, Holly repeated, as if arguing with the word could bend it. "Get it to say will." A soft pop sounded above them, and above them, and above them, and above it a soft pop sounded above them, and a soft pop sounded above them, and a soft, thin breath of air began to move through the room from a grill she had not seen. Together the air and the red light and the voice turned a space that had been a tomb into a mouth. "Ms. Cade." Gray's voice was closer now. He had not stepped inside. He would not. His hand was on the edge of the door. "If you have anything that belongs to this place, put it down and back away." The locket burned in her palm. The memorial pain under her collarbone brightened as if to answer, "I belong." Everyone who had ever said she did not, too quiet, too strange, too careful, too unwilling to leave stood in the doorway of her life, and she stood on the other side, and this was the first door she had ever opened for herself. Countdown. 60 seconds. The voice had no inflection. The men did. Hale's was a blade. Gray's was a rope. "Listen to me," Gray said. "You don't have time to prove a point. If you trip the wrong circuit, she already has," Holly snapped. "Look at the vent. Look at the light, Miss Cade. Bring me the locket." "You can't have it." Her fingers tightened despite the heat. The smell of ozone sharpened until it burned the back of her throat. The first page of the memo stack in her bag rustled as if a hand had turned it. "Then this will not be friendly," Holly said. Something cold slid into his voice, heavier than threat, lighter than promise. "I am prepared to be unkind on behalf of the public." "Which public?" she asked. "The one that survived the last time we made mistakes like this." Countdown. 45 seconds. Her head swam. She put one hand on the table to steady herself, and the red light there brightened further, as if it had been starving for heat, and she had given it a palmful. On the table, under the paling edges of paper, lay something that did not belong in this decade or any. A stack of photographs developed in a lab that had long since become a nail salon. A reel, a key that did not fit any lock made by humans older than her. And on top of them all, a plastic case with a strip of magnetic tape visible under a clear window, labeled in a hand she knew only because she had taught it to herself this morning. Winterglass, MUREX, 39/K. Her stomach bottomed. Her hands knew that shape. That tape did not belong to this room. It belonged to a mouth that would speak the moment it touched a machine that had been waiting exactly 39 years to agree it would still listen. Miss Cade. Gray's shadow pooled at the threshold. His body stayed in the light. If you take that, I can't help you, even if I want to. You don't, she said. Maybe I do. Countdown 30 seconds. Hale's grip on her arm tightened to the edge of pain, and then one notch passed. She did not pull away because to pull would be to confess, and the day had already asked too much of her confessions. She reached with her free hand and took the tape. It was lighter than it looked. It felt like a promise and a dare. The speaker coughed. Intrusion escalation detected. Warning, defensive protocol will engage in 20 seconds. Now it says. Will, Holly said grimly. He turned to Gray without letting go of her. Get your people ready, my people, Gray asked lightly. I'm just a contractor. Contractors don't carry radios with encrypted channels, Hollis snapped. Gray's smile did not change. And directors don't climb into washes without backup. His eyes cut to Annalise. Give me the locket. No. 10 seconds. The voice had no urgency because it didn't need any. It had absolute faith that time would do its job. Ms. Cade, Gray said. Annalise, Hollis said. And the first time he used her first name, it landed like a coin. You do not remember putting on the table. She looked at the tape in her hand and saw not a thing. Not a file, not a weight, but a path where the next step was the only step. The girl in the Polaroid stood where her shadow fell and did not cry. 5. She turned toward the door. 4. A figure appeared on the rim above the wash, silhouetted against the bruised sky. 3. Sheriff. Gray shouted, relief. And calculation grafted to the same word. Down here. 2. Annalise. Hale's voice lost its metal for 1 second and showed something behind it that might have been honest. Please, 1. The wind died. The speaker clicked. The room took a breath. Defensive protocol engaged. Something deep in the wall behind the bulletin board woke up fully. A relay the size of a book or a heartbeat, a device that had nothing to do with the world outside and everything to do with the one inside. The air shifted, sweet and wrong, and a hiss began like soda opening small, almost friendly. Gray swore. It's gas. Holly tightened his hand on her arm and yanked. She caught the doorframe with her free hand and anchored herself by will. And rust. The hiss sharpened. A film formed on the table's plastic window. A sheen climbed the map's red strings. The hair on her arms remembered what fear feels like when it has a smell. Let go, Holly said through his teeth. No. She set her shoulder against the door, and the door answered with a groan she felt in her back teeth. The locket sizzled against her palm, hot enough now to be a brand. Make it stop, she threw at the speaker. Defensive protocol will disengage. Upon vault seal, the voice replied, patient as math. Close it, Gray barked. Now. She looked at the tape in her hand. At the narrow path of light from the wash. At the shape on the floor that had been a hand. She looked at the Polaroid. In her pocket without pulling it out. She looked at Hale's fingers digging into her skin and Gray's shadow ready to become a man again, and at the figure on the rim above them that had started down. Fast and clumsy, shouting her name, she threw the tape into the messenger bag, wrapped the locket chain around her fist, and slammed the door with everything the accident had left her. It hit the frame, bounced, and then, as if remembering how to behave, settled home with a final satisfied sound. The hiss cut off so completely her ears rang with its absence. The reader's light blinked red, then green, then nothing. The wind returned. It had found its courage again, and it brought the town's dust with it. Holly let go of her arm. Gray's shoulders went down. On the rim, Sheriff Oates skidded to a stop where the wash's slope steepened, breath sawing, hand on his knee. "What?" he panted. "In God's name is happening?" No one answered him first. Holly did not, because he was counting what he had lost. Gray did not, because he was counting what he could still steal. Annalise did not, because the locket had gone quiet, and the quiet felt like the instant between a thunderbolt and its sound. Sheriff Oates straightened, eyes taking them all in with the old soldier's boresight. His gaze caught on the messenger bag in the way it hung heavy against Annalise's hip. He opened his mouth. A second voice drifted from the grill behind the door. It was thinner, younger, layered under the first as if two tapes had been spliced badly in a rush, and only now decided to line up. "Agent Cade," it said, and the sensation of her own name spoken by a stranger who might have made it for her stripped the air from her lungs. Primary retrieval complete. Secondary sequence begins upon receipt of phrase. The town at the bottom of the wind. Holly went very still. Gray did not move at all. Sheriff Oates looked from face to face, confused and angry, a man who had walked into a room and found all the furniture had been nailed to the ceiling. Annalise's mouth formed the phrase before her mind agreed to it. She did not speak it yet. She tasted it. It tasted like dust and rain. Holly took a step toward her. "Don't." It was almost a plea. Gray tilted his head, listening to something distant that might have been the radio in his van, or men up on the rim, or the sound a net makes when it is pulled tight around a thing you have spent half your life trying to catch. Sheriff Oates put his hand on the butt of his sidearm, not to draw, but to remind everyone the county had laws even in washes, where doors breathed and said in a voice that made the wind pause, "Annalise, whatever this is, you tell me before you tell any machine." She looked at him, at the years he had given to a town that forgot its own when they embarrassed it. She looked at Holly, at the career welded to a set of initials. She looked at Gray, at the contractor who fixed what no one wanted to admit was broken. She looked at the door that had kissed the messenger bag with a chemical dream and then gone to sleep again with its mouth closed. Her tongue shaped the first word of the phrase. The wind found its voice again and hurled grit across the wash in a sheet. Holly flinched. Gray did not. Sheriff Oates squinted and waited. The reader on the door, dead and harmless, winked once as if a pilot light had tested itself and gone out. Annalise drew breath to speak, and a shot cracked from the rim above them, hard and clean, chasing the dust like a hawk. A puff of rock jumped from the wall, inches above her head. Oates spun toward the sound and bellowed. Gray dropped like a man who has practiced dropping. Holly moved without thinking and without drawing, his body between her and the line the bullet had taken, and the wash that old, dry mouth opened to swallow a second shot that came meaner than the first. The locket in Annalise's fist pulsed once, a single shock that went bone deep. As if something inside it had chosen now to decide. She turned toward the rim and saw the shape there, a long coat, a hat pulled tight, a rifle braced on the rail of the fence that had lied about being repaired, and the shape did not belong to Holly or Gray or the sheriff or any story. The town would tell about itself when the wind died. It belonged to her past. It belonged to the photograph. It belonged to the voice that would answer when she finally spoke the phrase the machine wanted, and it called down in a voice the wind could not break, pure and terrible and young on teeth that had never known coffee, a name she had not given her own mouth in 29 years. Kaspzak. The sound carved her in half. The next shot, if it came, would not miss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Kaspzak. The name struck the wash like a thrown iron, hissing where it met the thin water left by last week's storm, searing through the skin she had grown over everything old. The sound bounced once off the concrete of the hidden door, and once off the ribbed steel of the chain-link fence, and then found her spine and sat there, cold and heavy. Down! Sheriff Oates roared, not at her but at the sky, at the voice, at the years of training that had taught him to move first and talk later. He lunged sideways, and the gravel betrayed him with a skid that would have sent any other man sprawling. He caught himself with a hand that had known sandbags and rotors and night vision, and came up with his sidearm drawn but low, muzzle a dark pupil tracking the rim. Holly didn't draw. He stepped in front of her without comment, shoulder angled. Weight forward, as if a lifetime of rooms with too many exits had taught him the geometry of being a wall. Gray dropped as if gravity remembered him, his palms already on the dirt, boots scissoring until he was behind a stone the size of a sheep. The second shot spit stone dust into Annalis's hair and went wide because the wind misbehaved or because the shooter changed their mind at the last inch. She couldn't tell which. "Show me your hands," Oates bellowed, voice climbing the wash. A third crack answered him immediately, not from the rim, but from somewhere off to the right. The echo devious, the kind of ricochet men later swear came from two places at once. The sheriff pivoted, trying to find the line. Annalis's knees had bent without permission. She didn't drop because the messenger bag thudded against her ribs and the locket burned. Like a live coal, and some old bone in her decided that standing was the only thing it still believed in. She pressed her back to the cold door that had just tried to kill her and forced herself to look up. The shooter's silhouette had rearranged itself. The hat brim tilted, the long coat cinched by the wind. The rifle's barrel gleamed for a blink and then went to shadow again. The face was a wedge carved out of sky, too far to read. Close enough that the voice reached her clean when it came again. Kaspzak. The name this time wasn't thrown. It was lowered, a rope tossed toward a ledge. The accent was not the accent of Garnet Ridge, or of Hale's careful syllables, or of Gray's feed store charm. The vowels stretched and were pulled back, like a language taught by a careful mouth that had kissed colder rooms. Younger, yes, a voice without coffee. But the consonants knew winters she did not remember on purpose. Hale's hand took her elbow without asking. "If you know that name," he said in a voice only she heard, "you also know the next 3 seconds matter more than whatever you think about me." "Sheriff," Gray called, still behind his rock, still smiling somehow. "My people can close this out. You want me to call them in, you say the word." "I don't want your people," Oates snapped. "I want eyes on that fence line, and I want—" The rifle barked again, but the shot wasn't for them. It was for the chain link a yard above Hale's head. The metal sang and shivered. Rust dust fell like red snow. "Enough," Holly said softly. To the air. A figure slid into view on the rim to the left of the shooter, just a flash. The ghost of a man with a cheap windbreaker and a walkie pressed to his face. "2 more," Gray said under his breath. "At least." The locket in Annalis's palm pulsed once hard and then went quiet, as if it had exhausted its language on the door and now saved breath for later. The scar under her collarbone ached with a second heartbeat that was none of hers. She did not look at the locket. She looked at the space between shots the way she used to look at lines at a ledger timing, spacing what was missing as much as what was present. Wind braided grit into her hair. She could taste it, chalk and salt, and a memory of metal. The figure on the rim adjusted their stance, and the motion was wrong for a man who had never learned to dance with a rifle. It was too smooth, too practiced, like the barrel was part of their arm, not a tool. "Kaspzak." The voice called. For the 3rd time, and now there was no wind between syllables at all. Answer. Her name was a country she had left in the night. It was a passport a stranger was trying to stamp for her without asking which way she was traveling. Annalise swallowed and felt the swallow catch on the ragged edge of a memory that had been sanded smooth by years of willful denial. She made a shape with her mouth and then changed her mind. "Don't," Holly said, the word a warning and a request. "They don't get you for free." Oates took 2 quick steps to his left, crouch sprinting up the slope toward a scrub that would put him at a better angle. "Hands," he shouted again, "or I will shoot." His voice wasn't a dare. It was a warning from a man who hated the taste of shooting his own county. "Sheriff," Gray called, almost cheerful. "Let me—" "Quiet," Oates snapped. And Gray fell obediently, if not sincerely silent. The shooter's barrel dipped. The hat brim lifted an inch, as if whoever wore it had tilted their face to smell the air. "Agent 39, the voice called, and the number rang her bones like a judge's gavel. "Confirm status." She had not spoken Russian out loud in years. She could count only by the taste of numbers on her tongue. She had not thought in it even to herself. But something in her mouth remembered the shape of a reply that no one else had put there. "Dormant," she said, and heard Holly flinch, not at her voice but at the word. The shooter made a sound she couldn't name. Not relief, not triumph, something like both and neither. "Then awake," the voice said, "before they put you back to sleep." 2 more shapes topped the rim to the right. Gray was already moving before Annalise had registered them. Dropping lower, hands in the sand, a man going small to go invisible. "Back," Oates barked, posture shifting from advance to cover. And to his credit, he didn't care if Holly or Gray obeyed so long as the trajectory that ended in a body didn't end in his town. Holly didn't move. He had shifted his stance. Half an inch so he was not blocking her, but he was still between her and a bullet he could not deflect. "Who sent you?" he called up to the rim. The voice that came back was a laugh with no mirth in it at all. "You did," the shooter said, and if Holly ever showed shock, it did not show now, years ago. The wind found patience again and pressed itself flat. In the silence, from behind Annalise, behind the door, came a dry click, as if a tape had finished rewind and was waiting for a finger to lift and let it spin. Holly heard it. She felt him hear it, his attention cutting the room into segments. He angled his body 2 degrees back toward the door, not away from the shooter, but to make 2 trajectories share one line. His hand had not left her arm. His fingers loosened, not because he felt safe, but because something like respect and something like calculation had reached an agreement. 5 minutes, he said softly, not to her and not to Gray and not to the sheriff. That's what you have before the people behind that voice make a decision for you. What decision? She asked, and it cost her to ask. Questions open doors, too. She had opened enough for one morning. "Who you are when you leave this wash," he said. "Miss Cade, Kaspizak, agent, civilian, all of them or none." He looked up at the rim. "Stand down," he called. "We're leaving." A long, slow beat. Then the windbreaker man on the left lifted his hand off his walkie and made a sign with 2 fingers that could have meant anything from "I see you" to "on board." The shooter didn't fire again. The hat tilted a degree. The rifle's barrel rose to the sky and came down in a lazy arc, then stowed itself behind a coat that knew how to hide right angles. "Sheriff," Holly said, "please." Oates's jaw moved, a muscle that had learned to grind what it could not bite. "You think I'm putting you in a car with her after?" "I'm asking you to put her in a car," Holly said, the emphasis deliberate, "with you. I'll take my own vehicle. Mr. Gray can take his. We'll meet at your office where the cameras work and the coffee tastes like pennies." Gray's laugh was genuine. He's not wrong about the coffee. 2 minutes, Holly repeated to Annalise without the cadence of a threat. "Decide which parts of your story you're willing to tell a man who showed up first when someone called your name with a rifle." He let go of her arm finally and took a step back, hands where Oates could see them, jacket open, nothing sudden. "Sheriff," Oates did not holster his weapon. He did, however, nod once, short and decisive, as if what he was agreeing to was not a plan but a delay until he could make one of his own. Up, he told Annalise, his free hand offering not a touch but a path. She moved. The messenger bag knocked against her hip. The locket cooled, as if the decision had taken a fever with it. She climbed the slope and felt the wash try to hold her, not with malice, but with the logic of gravity. Sheriff Oates locked his body into a ladder, and she put her palm on his shoulder, long enough to anchor, long enough to remind both of them they were not alone in this stupid, beautiful county. At the rim she turned and looked back. Hawley stood below, smaller than the man who had filled her doorway minutes ago. He looked like a chess piece between moves. Gray had already reached his van and was on the radio with a voice he had not invented for Garnet Ridge. The shooter was gone. The wind had smoothed the footprints on the fence line, the way water smooths a grave. She climbed into the sheriff's truck and did not buckle her seatbelt. He did not start the engine. He watched her instead, eyes on her shoulder more than her face. "You are going to tell me," he said, not unkindly, "what the hell is happening?" Annalise looked down at her hands. Gray frowned. "What recorder?" "The one in my bones," she said, and the shooter smiled at that, as if she had said a password in a language they had chosen together in a summer she did not remember. Oates nodded once, as if surprise was an indulgence he could afford tomorrow. "We go together," he said. "All of us. Luz, call Deputy Cruz. Lock the back again. Tell Flaco to keep the alley clear." He looked at Hawley. "You don't order anyone. You ask in my building." Hawley inclined his head. "Understood." Gray stood and cracked his knuckles just to annoy Hawley. "Road trip," he said. "I'll follow. I assume your evidence room is not hospitable to extra guests." Luz met them at the door with a look that said she would tell her cousins everything later, even if she didn't understand it now. The bell protested being used so much. The wind had softened, a dog deciding there might be a nap later. They filed into the street in a line no one would have planned. Sheriff, archivist, man with a government, contractor with a radio, kid with a voice like winter. The courthouse steps took the years in them, the way old men take stairs, with protest and muscle memory. The building's hallway smelled like wax and a life that believed the word records was a blessing and not a sentence. In the elevator, no one spoke, and Annalise let that be a prayer. On the archive level, the air moved the way it always did, as if the building itself exhaled when the door opened and then held its breath until she left. She unlocked the door and ushered them into the room that had always felt like a cathedral to people who didn't feel at home in churches. Oates closed it behind them. He posted Gray by the far corner where the angle to the rolling shelves would make it awkward for him to do anything sudden. He posted the shooter by the door and Hawley by the ledger. He left himself the chair by her desk as if he could understand what she might be without blocking who she had been. Annalise went to the ledger. The entry was still there like a handwriting sample in a court case. Cade, a box 39 to 74. She ran her finger under it the way a teacher runs a finger under a line of children going out to recess. She turned the rolling shelves to open a path to the 39s. She reached the panel and found the seam like a second mouth refusing to smile. "You found this accident," Hawley said softly. Not a question. A line he had assigned her and now wanted to see if she would read. "I found it because it wanted to be found," she said. "Doors are like cats." "Dog person," Oates murmured. Which was true and irrelevant. She pressed the latch the way her hand had learned to. The panel slid back and the cold breathed out a whisper this time, as if the vault below had lost some of its arrogance when it coughed on its own gas. She slid the winter glass box from its nest and set it gently on the metal desk that had confessed so many stories. She undid the tape with a librarian's mercy. The memos lay where she had left them, the microfilm tin shining like an old coin, the waxed paper folded around absence where the locket had been. "Listen," she said. "Please." She did not look at Holly or Gray or Oates or the shooter. She looked instead at the small, invisible space in the air where a voice had lived that morning. She was a woman alone in a room, talking to a thing that two men would call a machine and a third would call a song. "You asked for a phrase." Holly made a soft noise. Oates didn't. Gray's mouth quirked like a kid daring a teacher to take his gum. The shooter's fingers flexed once and settled. "I want something in return," she said to the space. She had never bargained with a filing cabinet. The room listened anyway. No gas, no defenses, no tricks. You speak and then you wait. Silence piled itself like paper. The locket hummed once and went quiet. Somewhere in the wall, the thermostat clicked. Somewhere in the hallway, the elevator coughed like a smoker who had not promised to quit and never would. "Murex Series 39. A voice said politely from the ceiling vent. English this time, no Russian first. "Local node, ready. Defensive protocol, off." Holly swore softly in a language with a lot of consonants. Gray's eyebrows did something a magician's hands do when he's proud of a trick he did not perform. Oates set his coffee on the desk without spilling it until after, and then, when it did spill, he did not apologize to the desk because he had bigger manners to mind. Annalise put her hands on the edge of the table and made sure she could feel. Metal and not air, because it is good to know whether you are grounded. Then she spoke the phrase, "The town at the bottom of the wind." It tasted like rain in a drought. The locket warmed enough to tell her she wasn't a liar. The vent breathed. The light in the room did not flicker, because the building had had better electricians than credit. But the air did a small thing like stepping from one foot to the other. "Key phrase received," the voice said. "Agent of record, Cade. Status, awake. Secondary sequence available. Deliverables prepared. Awaiting directive. What are the options?" She asked, and the archivist in her took notes in her head the way a starving woman takes inventory of a pantry. "Transmit," the voice said. "Archive, burn." Gray barked a laugh. "They made it easy." "They made it simple," Holly corrected. "Nothing easy about any of those." "Define transmit," Oates said like a man reading a recipe out loud to keep a family from fighting at the table. "High-frequency relay," the voice said. "Per Appendix C arrays available, courthouse. Roof, water tower, decommissioned civil defense siren. Frequency, 10.113 megahertz, window, open. Define archive," Annalise said. "Store locally," the voice replied. "Nodes, courthouse vault, wash vault, depot subnode. Status compromised." "Define burn," Holly said. Not because he wanted to, but because he was the man who had to be willing to say the word. "Destroy recoverables," the voice chimed. "Zero-wise keys, sleep." The room classified itself in 3 piles at once. The kind of day where you send, the kind where you keep. The kind where you make the smart, cruel choice that saves strangers and kills something only you will. "Mourn, deliverables," Annalise said. "Because a person can love a plural for how it promises weight." A panel that had always been drywall unclipped itself above the vent and dropped an inch, just enough to spit out a package the size of 2 hands. It hit the desk with a sound like the lip of a glass touching wood. Oates's gun rose reflexively and then fell because he was not a man who shot presents. Gray and Holly both checked the ceiling for other gifts because men who had lived with. Bombs do not assume generosity twice. Annalise unwrapped the package. Tape gave like a doorknob opening under a friend's hand. Inside lay a stack of thin sleeves, each the size of a paperback, each holding a slip of magnetic tape narrower than her thumb. They were labeled in the meticulous block hand from the Winterglass box. The topmost label stripped her of oxygen. K.A. Orientation audio under it. K.A. Field K. MAPKA. Keys, partial. There were others. Names she did not know and did not want to yet. The kind of labels that make two men decide whether to leave a room and return with hand trucks. The kind of labels that make a sheriff decide whether to call the state or find a reason not to. How do we listen? She asked. Players in vault. The voice said, readers in wash. Appendix C includes emergency interface, or hum. Oates repeated, distrustful of whimsy. What the hell does hum mean? The voice did not answer except by making this small sound that was exactly like a person humming a note to find another in the dark and decide whether to sing along. The locket warmed again, and her scar answered, and somewhere in Garnet Ridge, the wind shaped the word now and pushed it under the courthouse door like a flyer. Transmitting means others hear, Holly said. And not just your friends, he added to the shooter, who did not dignify the word friend and did not correct it either. Archiving means we play their game again. Gray observed. Hide it. Tape the door, pretend the shelf will be fine. Next time we need it. Burn means your history becomes smoke again, he added, to Annalise. And this time you did it to yourself. What do you want? She asked the shooter. To stop being on a shelf, they said, which was not an answer to any of the three choices, and was an answer to all of them. Sheriff? She asked. Oates rubbed a hand over his face as if he could erase everything except the word protect. He looked at the ceiling like a man asking a god he only half believed in for a second opinion. If you send it, he said, you don't get it back. If you keep it, my people will die for it. If you burn it, you might save them and kill. Something that belongs to you. He took a breath. I don't get to choose for you. But if you choose keep, I will put bars on this room and men on those bars, and we will become a story we don't survive. Holly watched her like a man reading a seismograph before the wave hits. Gray was already calculating how many men would arrive and when. The shooter stared at the locket like it had a mouth and had just refused to kiss them. Annalise lifted the top sleeve and slid the tape out far enough to see its oxide shine. She set it on the desk and put her fingertips to the plastic as if she could feel the shape of her own voice trapped inside. She could not. But something in her blood remembered. Being 12 and knowing what machines want from human mouths. Men like me, he said. Men like him. He didn't include the sheriff because he wasn't a liar. And people who aren't in this room. People with long memories, Gray repeated pleasantly. And short patience. Then, we make them wait, Oates said. A knock like someone who didn't know the door was supposed to be tired rattled the frame at the front. Luz poked her head in. He says he's not leaving, she said, and her face had arranged itself into the kind of calm that precedes a storm. He says if you don't come out, he'll come in. Who? Oates asked, though in his gut he knew. The one in the hat, she said. He's not pointing his gun, but he's got it like it belongs to him. Holly stood. Gray didn't. Yet, he watched the doorway like a man finally getting the show he'd paid for. Oates rolled his shoulders once, a motion like putting down a pack just to pick it up again. Stay here, he told Annalise. No, she said for the third time. In 10 minutes, and in some universe where she did what she was told, the day might have gone easier. In this one, she stood too, the chair legs squealing against tile, and took the locket in her fist so the chain cut her palm and made sure she remembered what choosing felt like. In the lobby. The wind came through the door in a thin blade when Oates opened it. The hat sat on a head attached to a body attached to a rifle and a coat and a set of eyes too bright for the gray day. Younger than she'd thought on the rim. 19? 20? Age was a bad guess when you counted by winters instead of birthdays. The mouth was set like someone had shown it how and it had kept the lesson. The eyes did not blink enough. Sheriff, the shooter said, pleasant as a borrowed robe. The voice fit the hat better now that it was not coming through wind. I'm here for the agent. Which one? Oates asked. Dry. I got a lot of agents today. The one with the key, the shooter said. Their gaze flicked to Annalise, and then away, not because they were afraid to look, but because they had been taught not to look so hard you broke things. Name? Oates asked, because names are doors and you ask for them before you open the right ones. The shooter's mouth twitched. You already know what I'd tell you. The accent in the vowels put snow on the syllables. Polish, Annalise thought. Not because she spoke it, but because the consonants went home in her ear in a way that made English feel rented. It will do you no good. Holly moved into the shooter's peripheral vision as if he were plant life. Tell him anyway. The shooter didn't look at him. I'm a message, they said. For the agent. From those who remember what she was. And from those who remember what was done. They lifted a hand, slow and empty. Cloth pulled back from the wrist. A small, pale scar showed, almost the twin to the one under Annalise's collarbone. We woke when she did. We answer when she answers. Gray whistled low. Well, well. Put the rifle on the floor, Oates said. Kick it away. It's not for you, the shooter said calmly. It is, Oates said. Today everything is for me. He did not raise his voice. He did not move his gun. He stood like a man whose job was to make rooms boring again. The shooter considered boredom and decided it would live. They crouched, placed the rifle on the mat, and slid it with the toe of the boot. It bumped a brochure rack, rattling the pamphlets about county fairs and irrigation rights and a drug take-back day next Thursday. Thank you, Oates said. Now the coat. The shooter shrugged out of it like shedding a husk under a hospital. Blanket. Underneath, a thin sweater the color of dishwater, and a chest that had never regretted cigarettes. The holster at the back was empty. The knife on the belt was not. Oates's finger tapped the frame of his gun. The shooter smiled without teeth and unbuckled the knife, sliding it across like a boy surrendering a slingshot under a mother's. Stare, better, Oates said. Now the shoes. This time the smile showed teeth. No. Then that's enough for now, he said, too wise to embarrass a person in front of neighbors if he didn't have to. He nodded at the chairs. Sit. The shooter sat. The metal side. Holly took the seat far enough that a hand wouldn't mean anything before words did. Gray found the window again. Like a plant in cheap light, Annalise stood in the doorway of the conference room and watched the person who had called her a name she hadn't fed since she was a child. The shooter's eyes had that ring dark around. Light that the girl in the Polaroid had had and that Annalise saw some mornings when light betrayed her. The wrist scar was too neat for a kitchen accident and too old for a knife stunt. The locket under her sweater hummed once, delicate as a moth tapping glass. Say it, the shooter said softly to her. Not loud enough for Oates to think it was. An order, loud enough that Holly saw the word arrive and decide not to intercept it. Say what? Annalise asked, and her body already knew. The phrase. The shooter's mouth softened around the word phrase like it was a thing they'd chewed to pulp years ago. The one the door wants. If I do, she said, it wakes things. If you don't, they said, they wake themselves, and you will not be the one who decides who they speak to first. And you will? The shooter tipped there. Head, young shoulders lifted, dropped. I will try to keep you alive long enough to hear it. What do you want from her? Oates asked without looking away from the hands. To choose, the shooter said, without being told which choice makes her easier to carry. They looked at Holly, and without being told which one makes her easier to file. Holly did. Not pretend to be offended by a thing that was true. If she says it here, he said, this building stops being a building and becomes a keyboard. Do you want your fingers under its keys? Every building is a keyboard, the shooter said softly. You are the man who pretends typewriters are safer than pianos. I'm the man who pays for the piano after someone plays the wrong song. Holly said, and Oates snorted despite himself because sometimes even the man You disliked got a line right. Gray stretched until his spine cracked. Choice time, he looked at Annalise. You can make the worst possible decision and still sleep at night if you make it yourself. Or you can make the right one and never sleep again if he makes it for you, he said, tipping his head at Holly. Or if I do. I'm not making the worst decision, she said. And the room waited to see what she meant by worst. She reached into her sweater and brought the locket out. The chain dragged a kiss across her neck. Holly didn't move. Oates' finger tightened and then loosened. Gray smiled as if he'd known she would. The shooter's pupils widened until the ring of light went thin. Stand, she told the shooter. Oates opened his mouth and closed it again. He let the kid stand because he had already taken the rifle and the knife and the coat, and sometimes dignity kept rooms calm better than locks did. Annalise lifted the chain over her head. The locket swung between them on an axis that made an old part of her dizzy. She stepped forward once. The distance ate itself. She extended the locket and watched the shooter's throat move once, when they swallowed like someone who had seen other people take bread and not known what it would taste like for themselves. Hold out your hand, she said. They did. She did not place the locket in the shooter's palm. She turned their wrist very gently, her fingers on the scar, and laid the metal against the spot where old heat had made skin go thin. The locket pulsed. The shooter's breath hitched. The hum came up through both of them at once, two bones tuned by the same note, and the room folded down to a list of 4 things: heat, metal, pulse, choice. What does it want? She asked, because sometimes you ask a question the shape of an answer you think you know and need someone else to say. To know if it has 2 hands, the shooter whispered. What if it does? Then it opens both doors. The kid's eyes found hers for the first time full on. They were the color of storm glass, and the metal ring was thick as if iris and pupil were arguing about who got to see. And it stops waiting for you to ask permission to be yourself. Sheriff, Holly said very softly. I see it, Oates said. Annel. Ice removed the locket from the shooter's wrist. The skin there was faintly pink where the metal had kissed it. She put the chain back over her head and let the weight find its spot on her sternum. She felt more herself with it there and hated that she did. Here is what happens next, she said, not because she was certain, but because certainty moves a room when doubt drowns it. We go to the courthouse. The vault is at the wash, Holly said. The reader isn't, she replied, and saw his surprise, the flick of it, not enough to entertain. Just enough to let her know she had found something he had not said. There's a panel in the stacks. A box labeled Winterglass. The memos talked about Reiki procedures. You said typewriter. He said piano. I'm going to use a recorder no one's used since they taught us to stop listening. Appendix C, she said to the air. Emergency interface. Show me, the voice obliged. A panel on the side of the desk that had never been anything but scratched paint winked an LED she had never seen and produced a cable that belonged in a museum. Annalise lifted it like a relic and then realized her body had already decided what to do with it before her mind named it. It was a stethoscope. For a machine, Holly exhaled. Of course, he murmured. Of course it's in her desk. Everything is in my desk, she said. And Gray laughed because he had a desk once, and it had held a gun and a wedding ring and a plant. He kept killing, and the phrase felt like a sympathetic curse. She slid the cable into the tape's mouth in the room, held its breath again because bodies remember the sound of microphones being put in front of the right throats. The locket thrummed once, the vent sighed. The LED on. The desk went from red to green. Transmit. The voice asked pleasantly. She opened her mouth to say yes or no and instead said, on my terms. Define, the room said. I speak first, she said. I decide what frames you send. I decide who hears. And you will tell me who is listening. Cannot, the voice answered. Not all. Some. Then give me some, she said. Names, acronyms, flags, anything that tastes like a hand trying to take a thing that isn't theirs. Silence. Then, as if a reluctant teacher had decided a student would do the homework anyway, the voice said, Listeners, a Sickline, Deerhaven, Glasshouse, 3 unknown. 1 friendly. Hale's jaw tightened at the first. Gray didn't smile at the second. The shooter's face changed at the third in a way that made Annalise think of a basement, where someone had taught a child to lie to survive. Oates looked at her as if to ask which of those words were knives. Friendly? She asked. Designated, the voice said. Subject, K.A. Status, awake, remote. She tasted copper. Alive, she translated for no one and everyone. Who? Halle asked softly. Annalise did not answer him. She put her hand flat on the desk so the metal could remember that there were still things in this room not built with secrets. Transmit, she said. 1 minute, orientation, then cut. Ready, the voice said. She leaned toward the cable, as if speaking into it would matter, and then decided she did not care whether it did. She spoke anyway, to the room, to the roof, to the water tower, to the siren's sleep. My name is Annalise Cade, she said. It used to be something else. I am in Garnet Ridge, New Mexico, in a courthouse that pretends to be smaller than it is. If you have been waiting for me, you have wasted your life. If you are waiting to take what is mine because you think the word agent makes me yours, you are not invited. If you are the person whose name is on the back of a Polaroid, I will not show these men yet. I am awake. If you are the man who wrote the memos, I will decide when to forgive you. If you are the child with the voice like winter, she looked at the shooter and did not apologize for making them a sentence. You do not have to say the things they told you to say to live. She could feel Hale's eyes and Gray's and Oates's. She spoke anyway. You may have built me, she said, and the word hurt less than it should have, but I am not your shelf. Transmitting, the voice said, so politely it made politeness feel like a gun tucked into a purse. Up on the roof, an antenna that had heard more 4th of July fireworks than Morse code drew shapes in the air no one on Main Street could see. The water tower got a little less bored. The siren remembered what its lungs felt like, and then went back to dreaming about 1963, somewhere beyond town, at a listening post that wasn't on a brochure and would never have a ribbon cutting. A printer spit out a line of words that made a man stand up so fast he knocked his chair over and didn't notice. Gray's radio hissed. He turned it down without looking. Hale's phone lit his jacket a thin blue. He did not take it out. The shooter had closed their eyes like a person at a funeral who did not want to see who else had shown up. Oates did what men like him do when decisions bigger than their pay grade use their building to do push-ups. He stood between his people and the door. Cut, Annalise said. Transmission complete, the voice said. Her legs wanted to sit. She let them. The chair caught her like a friend who would not let her take all the weight even if she asked. Her hands shook. She put them under the table because she was tired of men seeing her tremble and believing it gave them a right to tell her what to do. Halle did not speak first. It surprised her. Gray didn't either. It surprised her less. Oates said, "Okay," which is a word good men use when they want to move a room from after to next. The LED on the desk blinked twice. The voice in the ceiling came back, thinner this time, like a thread pulled through cloth too many times. Local node, compromised, it said. Counter listening detected. Deliverables at risk. Recommend. Relocate. Relocate to where? She asked because she was still an archivist and archivists love a destination. Safe house, the voice said. Designation, Garnet Low. Wind, access, deputy key, door, water. Oates blinked. We don't have safe houses. Halle sighed, a sound like a pocket turning inside out. You do, he said. You just call them something hospitable. Where do you take families when the petroleum train breaks a valve? Where do you put the church when its roof fails? Where do you keep the kid whose father will go looking for him if he comes home? Oates rubbed the bridge of his nose the way men do when two truths decide to get married. The old pool, he said. Community center basement. We use it for overflow during storms. Door, water, Annalise said. Deputy Key, the shooter repeated. Cruz, Oates said, already dialing, already moving. A man who had decided that if the apocalypse wanted coordinates, it would have to take county roads to get there. We'll meet you at the center. Bring the red ring. And bring. No, he corrected himself, because he had almost said asterisk bring men. And men with too many opinions make rooms with too many guns. Bring no one. If anybody asks, you're checking the pipes. Gray checked his radio a second time and then looked at Holly like two men who had decided not to pretend that they weren't going to the same bad party. They'll be here in 20, he said. The ones who heard what they wanted and not what she said. 15, Holly corrected. If they were already listening. Then we should go, the shooter said. Before the wind picks up again, Annalise sealed the box. She slid 2 tapes into the messenger bag and left the others where they lay because sometimes you make the professionals work to punish them for trying to be efficient. She put the locket back under her sweater, where it made heat and weight and also a bullseye. She took one long look at the ledger because it had given her a truth, and she wanted to pay it with a glance. Hold on, Holly said, hand on the door where the panel hid. If anyone comes after us, lock it. It doesn't lock for you, she said. Then for yourself, he replied. Some day after today. They moved as a unit that had never practiced together and therefore had no choreographer to ruin it. Elevator, hallway, stairs, because the elevator tasted like a trap served with a bow. Liz watched them go with her phone in her hand and a text. Message open to her sister and 3 words typed, you wouldn't believe, and she didn't send it, because she did not want to put a story in the world that would make the world wider than it had room for. Outside, the wind did that thing it does right before a dust wall shows itself on the far edge of a valley. People who had lived here their whole lives lifted their chins and squinted and decided whether to finish their errands. A school bus took a corner too gently, taught to by 3 generations of drivers who had seen what happens when kids slide on vinyl seats. Because a driver wanted to make a light, they took 2 vehicles and a promise to meet. Oates led, Holly followed. Gray shadowed a block back, doing the thing where you look like you're going nowhere until you arrive exactly where you meant to go. The shooter sat behind Annalise in the truck, knees to the back of her seat, quiet. As a cat listening to a clock. The community center used to be the armory. It still smelled like varnish and gym shoes and the metal taste of folding chairs. The old pool had been filled with gravel and boxed with cinder block. The city had laid cheap carpet over it and called the result a multi-purpose space. The basement behind it had weird rooms that remembered something that no one in town had the right to remember. One of them was a boiler room that had never held a working boiler. Deputy Cruz met them with a ring of keys the size of a crown. She was young enough that Oates still called her kid in his head and never out loud. She had a nose ring and a degree in civil engineering that had somehow funneled her into this job. Her eyes went to the shooter and did not panic because she had grown up with men who kept guns as a language and she refused to speak it unless spoken to. Door? She asked, and Oates said, water. Then it's not in here, Cruz said, turning down the hallway with the confidence of a woman who had slept in these rooms on cots and had learned where pipes lied. It's out back. It went out into the wind and the smell of rain that might or might not honor its promise. The pool had been emptied in 1999, the year the voters decided basketball would save more kids than swimming. The deep end had. A rusted ladder that rose from gravel, like a baptismal font for people who had decided to leave drowning to other towns. Cruz went to the ladder and knelt and put her hand on the rung like a person touching a grave and feeling heat. "Here," she said, and twisted the rung left, then right. It moved. It should not have. Something below it clunked like a door remembering a song. "Deputy Key," the shooter said. Almost amused, Cruz raised one eyebrow and did not ask questions. She knew she would get answers to later if the world lets the good live. She pulled the ring from a clip on her belt and found a key with a red dot, worn almost off by a thumb that belonged to someone who had used it more than once. She slid it into a lock no one could see. The ladder went loose in her hands. "Help," she said, and Oates and Gray both stepped forward, and she let Gray take it only because he was already holding it like a man who knew ladders better than doors. They lifted. The ladder rose like a second spine, and the gravel sighed away from its edges. A panel the size of a coffin swung up on a hinge, hidden under 100 city council meetings. A breath of cold air climbed the steps from a stair that hadn't been steps yesterday. The smell was not ozone this time. It was paper and rubber and the lemon oil of a woman who had done her job with pride and died thinking. She had filed the last thing she would ever file. "After you," Gray said to Annalise, and this time, it did not sound like mockery. She went down. The locket warmed a degree every 3 steps. The light at the bottom came when it should come, not too early like a trap, not too late like a government test. The room was small and meant well. It had a table and 2 chairs and a cabinet and a safe. The safe wore the brand of a company that had gone under when banks decided other kinds of locks were sexier. On the cabinet sat a machine that belonged in a radio museum, a reel-to-reel player with labels in that blocky, meticulous hand that had written on her life before she had learned to hold a pen. Hawley exhaled. His body relaxed one notch because, as he would later admit out loud, he had expected something with fangs. Gray moved to the machine like a man smelling a car he knows has been maintained. Oates found the corners with his eyes and his instinct, and decided which he would die in if he had to. The shooter stood next to Annalise and did not touch her, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for her all day. "Node, low wind," the ceiling vent said pleasantly. "Welcome." "Hello," Annalise said, because it felt right to greet a machine that had been waiting this long to be spoken to by the person whose name it said. "We brought company." "Company registered," the vent said, and if it had opinions, it had the grace not to share them. "Deliverables available. Threats, near." "How near?" Gray asked. 15 minutes, the room answered, proving Hawley right and making Gray resent him for it. "Play it," the shooter said, and looked at the reel-to-reel as if it were a shrine. Annalise threaded the tape like a woman who had done it in muscle memory before she had ever learned to do it. In a library, she placed her fingers on the switches and turned them with a deliberate gentleness that made Oates want to touch her shoulder, and then not. The reels spooled, the heads kissed, the speaker coughed. Her own voice filled the room, except it wasn't her voice. It was the ghost of her voice, thinner and higher and burned at the edges by an air filter that had never been changed. It said, "Orientation, Series 39, Subject KIA," and hailed the date like a sailor. It said words in English, and then repeated them in Russian, and then said them slow in a third language that made the shooter's hand tremble, and her chest hurt and Hale's eyes moved the way a man's eyes move when his own history knocks. "We will be kind," the older male voice on the tape said. "We will not always be good." "Stop," Hawley said. "Play," Annalise said at the same time, and the machine politely obeyed the voice whose fingerprints were in its screws. "Agent Kea," the voice went on, "you will not remember this unless you have to. If you are hearing me now, you have chosen to be someone else, and that is a choice we have no right to take from you. If you are hearing me now and you did not choose, we failed you, and you have our permission to burn this room." Gray looked at Holly with an expression that said, "Your shelf is talking back." Holly stared at the speaker with the expression of a man who has found a family Bible and learned he is not in it. "Your name," the voice said, "and the kid with." The winter voice whispered it with the tape, and the locket pulsed, and Annalise kept herself on the chair because she did not want to give men the satisfaction of seeing her legs go out from under her. "You will have names. You will put them on like coats. You will take them off. None of them will be a lie if you chose them. Remember that." The tape clicked. The reel moved. A scratch of paper. Then her own child voice, carefully taught to. "Be brave. I will be kind," it said, stubborn as a scraped knee. "I will not always be good." Holly closed his eyes. Gray swallowed. Oates leaned forward on his knees like a man at a bedside. The shooter's hand shifted nearer to Annalise's on the edge of the table without touching. The ceiling vent breathed. Like a sleeping thing afraid to wake the person on its couch. "Threats, 10 minutes. The room said softly, apologetic. "Appendix C," Annalise said, when she trusted her voice. "Emergency dissolution. If we leave, what do you do?" "Sleep," the vent said. "If not woken. If woken by force, defend." "How?" Oates asked. "Fire," the room said. "Then water." "No," Holly said immediately. "Not with people above it." He looked at Annalise. "If they force it, this building becomes a story you don't want to tell." "We could move the tapes," Gray said. "Split them." "He takes some." He pointed at Oates. "You take some," he told Hala. "I take some." She keeps orientation. "If someone wants to stop a song, make them learn the whole orchestra." "Do that," the shooter said. "I haven't decided," Annalise said, and felt the kid's impatience flare against her skin like electricity. "I will not be the fuse in other people's bombs. Not again." "Then be the hand," the kid said. And if a person can say a thing like a prayer and a threat at once, they did. Feet thudded upstairs. Not a lot. Enough to be a problem if the problem was small. Oates's radio chirped and Cruz's voice came in tight. "Company," she said. "Black SUV, no plates. 2 sedans, 1 van. They wear their guns like a uniform." Holly and Gray shared a look that was not truce, not war, something like both. "Deerhaven," Holly said, "and friends." "And one I don't know," Cruz added. "He moves like he knows what my grandmother cooked on Sundays." "Friendly," the vent said, almost shy. "Keep them out," Oates said, already moving. "Whatever you have to do, that doesn't make me fire you tomorrow." "Yes, sir," Cruz said, and cut the mic. Annalise took the tape off the machine with hands that didn't shake and placed it in the messenger bag. She took one other, the one labeled keys, partial. She handed Kayfield to Holly without looking at his eyes and Glasshouse to Gray, because she wanted the man who smiled too easily to know his teeth could break. She kept K-map in her palm until the kid's hand hovered, and then gave it to them because some maps belong to mouths that can read them, transmit. The vent asked politely, as if it could not help itself and needed to be told no by someone brave enough to parent their own ghosts. "No," she said. "Not now." "Threats. 5 minutes." The vent swallowed the word. 3. "Up," Oates said. "Now." They filed back up the ladder, the gravel chewing the edges of their solace. The wind had decided to go from maybe to yes. On the far edge of town, a wall of brown lifted lazy skirts and came to dance. The parking lot held bodies that did not belong to potlucks. The SUV had tinted windows that showed teeth too white. The men by it had haircuts and boots that made Gray want to make jokes he didn't have time to make. "Sheriff," the man at the center called, strolling as if he had paid for the pavement. He wore no badge and too much permission. "We're here to assist." "Funny," Oates said. "I didn't ask." "We heard you ask," the man said amiably, and lifted his empty hands the way people do when they are about to take something. "You've got something that belongs to the people. We're the people. You'll forgive me, Oates said, if I don't take your word for which people you mean. Gray took a step that put him almost, but not quite, between the man and Annalise. Holly did not smile and did not move. The shooter had the kid's rifle again, somewhere between convenience and miracle. Cruz stood by the door with her hand on the handle and a face that said she could count the number of cars and the number of bullets, and neither added to anything good. Let me help you, the man said, and his voice had the easy sin of a preacher who had forgotten the names of the people he'd saved. You don't know what you're in the middle of. I never do, Oates said. And somehow I'm still sheriff. A woman in a black suit with a glasshouse pin on her lapel smirked. At Holly, you brought it home, she said. How domestic. Stay, Holly said to Annalise without looking at her. Behind me. No, she said, not defiant, simply done making other people's comfort blankets out of herself. She stepped sideways until the shooter's shoulder brushed hers. The kid's mouth tightened and then softened, as if being treated like an equal hurt and healed at the same time. Miss Cade, the preacher-voiced man said, and now he knew her name and did not use the old one. Your father would be. Don't, she said. If you say proud, I'll make a mistake I can't unmake. He smiled like a knife tilting to do the job it had been built for. Then I'll say relieved. This started before us. Let us end it. He reached one hand toward the messenger bag. The locket in her sweater pulsed once, hard enough to make her breath stop. The vent in the wall of the community center hissed like a cat. Somewhere under their feet water moved in a pipe where no water had moved before. Threats, present. The air said in a tone that had never changed, but now sounded like a friend pointing at a snake. Last chance, the man said to Oates. Step aside. Oates did not step. He simply planted and became a post. Holly made his decision. Gray made his. Cruz had made hers the minute she turned the key. The shooter had made theirs the moment the hat brim lifted in the wind. Annalise lifted her chin and understood that the only thing you can do with a past that calls your name is answer with the one you chose for yourself. She opened her mouth. Behind the men with the white teeth and the black windows, another car slid into the lot. No plates. No hurry. It stopped at the edge of the dust wall like a coin you spin until it decides to lie down. The door opened. A woman stepped out wearing a coat that had seen more goodbyes than weddings. She did not look at the men. She looked at Annalise. The ring around her eyes was dark against the storm glass of her gaze. The scar at her wrist showed when she lifted her hand and did not hide it. Kaspzak, she said, and the wind carried the name the way a mother carries a child who has been sleeping too long. Annalise tried to breathe and found that breath was a thing she could choose to do. Hello, the woman said, and her mouth bent on the word like a bridge. Do you remember me? The shooter made a sound that broke and then mended itself. Holly went very still, and Gray forgot to smile, and Oates did the thing men do when they are looking at a miracle and trying to find where to put their hands. Annalise began. The woman didn't wait. She stepped closer until the dust put a veil between the men who wanted the bag and the women who were busy deciding what the word belong meant. Her hand touched her own throat where a locket might have hung once and did not now. I've been waiting 39 years, she said, not unkindly. Please don't make me wait for the next word. Annalise opened her mouth, and the town at the bottom of the wind held its breath with her, and a siren. The old civil defense one that had slept so long, no one had bothered to oil it, found its voice and tore the sky in half. The men flinched. The dust wall hit the lot like a wave. The locket in her sweater burned like a red coin, and the vent in the wall whispered, "Transmit, window, now." She had 1 second to decide whether the next word would be a name or a command. She chose Irena. She gave the name to the air like a piece of bread to a dog that might bite and might not. The siren tore the sky, one long shiver that made wind into a blade, and the dust wall took the lot, turned edges to ghosts and men to silhouettes. With teeth, the woman in the coat stopped the way a body stops when it has found the one sound it traveled for. Her eyes storm glass lit from behind, warmed by a degree human ears can't hear. She did not touch Annalise. She did not try to earn touch with a story. She bowed her head a fraction, as if a prayer had been answered and she was the one who had asked. Dobres, she said, could not triumph. Not possession. A temperature. Inside, Sheriff Oates shouted over the siren, and moved with the kind of speed that looks slow because it has had practice. The men by the SUVs flinched, because even men with badges they do not show no to respect a town that remembers how to scream. The vent in the community center's wall hissed like a cat too proud to run. Transmit. Window. Now, it whispered. Again, and the locket under Annalise's sweater burned once, as if the metal were a wick and the air had fire in it. Command or name. She had chosen the name, now she gave the command. Hold, she said to the building, to the siren, to the thing behind the wall that had waited 39 years and learned patience badly. No transmit, not here. She tasted copper and dust and the old word for water in a language her mouth remembered when her mind did not. Route to low wind. 2 hands only. The vent's voice, polite as ever, changed key. Local node, hold low wind, ready. 2-hand protocol, pending. The woman, Irina, lifted her empty hands as if to let Annalise see there was no trick in them. You remember more than you think, she said, voice carrying easily under the siren, as if she'd learned to pitch words where noise could not catch them. I remember enough. Annalise answered, and the kid with the winter voice hat, off now, hair stuck with dust and short dark points, made a soft sound that could have been relief or grief or both. The men with the black windows reassembled their nerve. The preacher-voiced one smiled wide enough to show how much he paid for whiteness. That was a nice speech to the building, he called over the siren. Now hand us the bag like a citizen, and we'll all go talk where the paint isn't peeling. Oates stood between him and the people he had decided were his. This is my paint, he said. Sheriff, Hawley said, not taking his eyes off. The white-toothed man. We need the basement. Now. Or we will be negotiating in a room that has opinions. Cruz, Oates said into his radio, eyes still forward. Open the back. Bring the red ring. Lock us in when we're down. Copy, she said, and the back door clicked a sound that felt like a promise said under the breath. Dust thickened. It got in teeth and ears and decisions. Gray moved like a shadow with a sense of humor, angling so his body turned 50% into question mark, 50% into obstacle. After you, he murmured to Irina, and she gave him a look that could have welded pipe, and then went where Annalise went, without hesitation. They did not run. Running made prey shapes out of human ones. They walked with purpose. Oates first, broad shoulders in argument. Cruz at the door. Hawley a pace behind Annalise's left shoulder, as if he had finally decided which part of her to protect if he could pick only one. The kid at her right, watchful like a dog that intends to bite only the correct hand. Gray drifted, benign on the outside and measuring on the inside. The siren wound down. The air remembered it had always been dry. The dust didn't care. In that brown curtain, the agents with white teeth started forward. Last call, the preacher said. I hate shouting. Most profane thing you've said all day, Oates muttered. And then they were inside. The back hallway did what back hallways do, gave secrets a place to breathe and bad decisions, a place to turn into less bad ones. Cruz locked the door and ran the red ring through the slide, so it wouldn't open again even if a man in a suit sweet-talked it. She didn't ask who the new woman was. She didn't ask why the kid carried the rifle like a violin. She led them to the dead pool and the ladder and the hatch that had remembered a song when it shouldn't. 2 hands. Annalise said to the air as she put her foot on the first rung. The locket warmed in reply. Confirm. Pending. Low wind said. Second key, not present. The kids stopped at the hatch, eyes on Irina, and then on Annalise. I can be it, they said. Irina shook her head once. No, she asked for me. She touched the scar on her wrist like a priest. Touches a crucifix. Not for show, not for pity. Cuspsock, she said softly, and in the syllables was a summer Annalise did not consciously recall, and the sound of a staircase covered in dust. Then come, Annalise said, and took the second rung. The basement air met them like an animal that wants to be fed. Alert, not hostile. Low wind hummed once in the ductwork like a small throat clearing. The room, the table, the safe, the reel-to-reel, looked like it had looked 10 minutes ago, and completely different because it held the presence of a person who had not existed. Until this moment, in any place except a photo and the soft of a scar, Oates posted at the top of the ladder until Cruz relieved him. Gray took the corner where he could count and not be counted. Hawley stood by the safe, arms loose, a man prepared to be a hinge. The kid stayed by the door with the air of someone who can turn fear into distance. Calculations. Irina moved to the table and did not sit. Sitting is for women who get to rest. She set her palm on the metal and closed her eyes. Low wind, she said in Polish first, and then in English, precise, as if each syllable were a nail in a box. 2 hands. Identify the ceiling. Sighed, cautious and pleased. Irina Luniak, she answered, and the old consonants sat well in her mouth. The name fit her like a coat that had been mended well. Series 3926. Status, awake. She opened her eyes and looked at Annalise. And yours? Annalise could have said Annalise Cade and left it there. She could have said the name she had spoken into the wash, the one that had felt like swallowing a coin. She found herself saying, both, Annalise Cade, she said softly. Cuspsock. Then, because the room wanted shape, 3929? Maybe, I don't know how you counted us. The vent's voice warmed to a human temperature. Match, it said. 2. Hands, confirmed. Low wind, unlocked. Annalise let herself breathe out. Something like a pressure she had been holding at the back of her teeth eased. The locket cooled, 1/2 degree. Irina's shoulders dropped a fraction, the kind of release you can only see if you've waited at Borders with people who have wrong. Papers and right faces. Deliverables, ready, the room added. Threats, above. Above, the dust pummeled the community center doors, and the men outside decided whether to wait for visibility or to honor their training and break their own rules. Cruz's voice came soft and tight on Oates's radio. They're not patient, she said. I told them the boiler blew. They brought a company man anyway. Which company? Gray asked, never without curiosity, even when curiosity was the hole you fell into. Glasshouse, Cruz answered. And one from Deerhaven is watching the sprinkler valves like he wants to file a report about them. I don't recognize the third, but he looks like a man who tells other men where their shoes go. Ashkline, Hawley said under his breath. And the name felt like a drawer closing on fingers. Irina was not watching the radio. She was watching Annalise, her eyes moving like a mechanic's over an engine she'd built and sent out into the world to run without supervision. Do you remember my face? She asked, not pleading. Inventorying. Pieces, Annalise admitted, and the honesty felt like a debt paid. Not a story. Colors. The smell of wool. A voice that didn't lie even when it had to say the wrong. Words. Irina's mouth twisted. An expression in which you could fit sorrow and pride and 10,000 unsent letters. Then I did enough and not enough. She looked up at Low Wind's vent. Play orientation, she said. Then to Annalise, stay standing. I don't want them to hear you cry in case they're counting it. I don't plan to, Annalise said. Good, Irina replied. Plans are for fools. But they keep your hands busy. The machine spooled. The tape found its path. A man's voice, the one from before, old and careful and tyrannically gentle, filled the room with a sound like a library deciding whether to forgive a late return. He spoke English that had learned manners in Warsaw and Russian that had learned mercy in an Albuquerque motel. "If you are hearing this, you are choosing to make a choice," he said, and Annalise wanted to hate him and could not entirely. Because he had taught her child mouth to braid sentences without breaking them, Irina didn't listen to him. She watched the way Annalise's shoulders moved under the sweater when a word hit a memory. She watched Holly because his face said he had known the man on the tape and had not killed him for being the wrong kind of good. She watched the kid because their eyes softened a notch when the voice said kind and hardened again when it said good. Threats. 13 minutes. The room said pleasantly, as if announcing the next symphony. Deliverables? Holly asked, carefully neutral. New set, Lowen said. Prepared for 2 hands. Additional letters. Gray's attention sharpened like a knife under a dish towel. Letters? Personal communications, the room clarified. Not previously released. Irina's nostrils flared. Mine and others, Lowen said. 39s 21 through 28. Incoming 29. Won't stop a sick Klein, Holly said. He doesn't have a mother. He has a board. Boards have grandchildren, Irina said. We can use that. She turned to Annalise. It is your life. Choose. Basement or gym. Hidden or seen. Annalise hated the binary. The program had specialized in binaries. Choose kindness over goodness. Choose silence over safety. Choose names you can pronounce over ones you can't. But the dust above them was making other people make choices for them. Right now. She tasted the coin again, the one she had swallowed and turned into a name. She thought of Luz's lime nails and Cruz's red ring and Oates's back like a wall. She thought of kids on vinyl seats leaning into turns, and of the way men with white teeth smile when they get what they want. Seen, she said, but not by them first. Holly understood. We control the first frame, he said. We make the town the room. Oates clicked his radio twice. Luz, he said when she answered, his voice a baritone apology for what he was about to ask of her. Fire alarm, now full building. Then open the front doors and hold them open. Call Ortiz at the paper. Call Angel at the high school. Tell her the sheriff says she can get extra credit for civics if she brings her camera. On it, Luz said, and a second later the building shuddered as the alarms woke. Strobe lights blinked. The ancient horns bleated their sheep cry down the halls. Upstairs, the gym belched children and coaches and a pair of volunteer grandmothers in matching t-shirts. Sprinklers coughed. The Deerhaven man at the valves stepped back on instinct and then looked annoyed that instinct had told on him in public. Now, Irina said. She took the messenger bag from Annalise's shoulder with a touch that asked permission and returned it when the weight shifted. Keep it where eyes can see it. A secret is only a weapon when it is hidden. She flicked a glance at the kid. You will be very obvious. Stand close. Smile if you can. They climbed. The hatch thumped. The ladder came down on the gravel with a sound like men at a graveside who don't know who to look at. The gym sucked them into heat and noise and the wet smell of a building that was too old for its pipes. People were everywhere. A youth basketball game had become a committee meeting for the town's soul. Coaches counted heads. A grandmother with a clipboard asked who had allergies. A 7th grader filmed everything like his phone could save them, and maybe it could. Oates took the center court with the ease of a man who'd run high school ball on this very floor with worse shoes and more hair. He lifted his hands and the noise obeyed because that is a kind of safety towns learn. The man who tells us we're not to stand also tells us where to put our eyes. Folks, he said into the hot room, we have guests. They are here to help. He Let the sarcasm live in the word without feeding it, and we're going to let them. We're going to do it with our phones up and our mouths soft and our feet ready to move when I say so. He nodded at Luz, who had found a bullhorn, and the power in it. The men with white teeth didn't want to come into a gym full of people. They wanted to go down a quiet hallway and come back with a bag and look very tired and say they had saved the county from itself. They came anyway, because the doors were open and men with badges they didn't show hate to look like cowards. In front of teenage girls with cameras, the preacher-voiced man smiled as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. "Sheriff," he said, stepping onto the varnish. "We're all on the same team." "Good," Oates said, and gestured to the stands like a cop emceeing a talent show. "Here's your audience. Tell them your names." "Names," the man's smile tightened. "Unnecessary," he said, and the room, being a room that knows the taste of a lie, made a sound like a cough. "Then I'll start," Oates said. "This is Luz Ramirez. She keeps us from losing people we can't afford to lose. This is Deputy Ana Cruz. She does 3 jobs with the money for 1.5. This is Mr. Haile. He came with a letter and a habit of using words like typewriter. This is Kellen Gray. He installed your alarm system at the courthouse and then made it work better than you paid for. This is Annalise, who has had a day. This is," he glanced at the kid, who tipped their head like a bird acknowledging. "A crumb, a person who can shoot straighter than I want to talk about. And this is," he looked at Irina and paused not for effect, but because a man who respects names asks for how to say them, "Irina Luniak." She supplied, and she did not spell it for anyone. As if the town could be trusted to learn new letters, the glasshouse woman in the black suit stepped forward. She had a lapel pin and a haircut that looked like it had its own car. "We're federal partners," she said, and did not add with which part. "We have come to secure items of national importance. The county will be compensated." The room made another cough. Someone yelled, "Define compensated," from the back, which sounded like Angel the civics teacher. "Ma'am," Irina said, pleasant enough that the word ma'am became a knife wrapped in velvet. The last time a woman in a black suit told this town it would be compensated, it got a parking lot where a clinic had been. The woman's mouth primmed. "We are not here to debate history." "That is precisely what you are here to do," Halle said suddenly, and he surprised even himself. He looked at the faces in the bleachers, at the high school team whose practice had been interrupted, and the woman who taught GED classes and the old man who ran the bait shop with a cigar that was always unlit. "You are here to decide whether we tape a door shut and call it safety or open it and call it danger. You are not here for a bag. Then why bring it?" The preacher-voiced man asked, smooth. "Why show the town a bomb?" "Because the bomb is information," Gray said, his smile knife-bright now. "And sometimes the fuse goes slower when the room is noisy." Phones were up. Luz had climbed 3 rows and was filming with the steadiness of someone who had steadied. "Worse, Ms. Cade," the glasshouse woman said, turning the full beam of her smile. "Your father would want you to do the right thing." "My father," Annalise said, and the words found a shape they had not had before, "taught me to label boxes correctly and not to shake them. Everything else I learned from women who said my name like it belonged to me." She touched the messenger bag. It made a small sound, contents adjusting to intention. "I am not handing you something so you can build a shelf over a memory and leave it there until the next child grows up underneath it." The preacher-voiced man opened his hands. He had a talent for looking harmless. "Ma'am, you're in danger whether you do or you don't. Let us carry it. We get paid to be the mule." "Then you can carry the cameras," Oates said. "Start with mine." He held his phone out to the man like an offering. The room laughed, quick and grateful. Laughter is a kind of bravery. Holly leaned into Annalise's shoulder. "Window on the water tower," he said without moving his lips like a teenager making mischief in church. "It will open again in 1 minute. Low wind will tell you when. How did you know that? She asked, same way. Because this program was designed by people who loved routines and hated improvisation. He murmured. They trained the town to listen at certain hours. He lifted his chin almost imperceptibly toward the rafters. Listen. A small whine under the horns. Not the fire alarm, a frequency you could feel in your teeth. The locket kissed her sternum with heat. Low wind, she breathed. Status. Transmit window, water tower, the vent said, almost giddy. Now, I'll be right back. Annalise said to Oates, which is something you say before doing a thing you are not supposed to. Like hell. He started, and then saw where her eyes had gone. She wasn't looking at an exit. She was looking up. Climb, Irena said, already moving. She stepped onto the lower bleacher rail like someone who had snuck into wrestling matches in another century and knew exactly where the loose screws were. The kid followed her with the rifle slung in a way that looked like a mistake and wasn't. Holly didn't climb, but he stepped under the ladder cage to be the man bodies hit instead of the floor. Ma'am, the glasshouse woman called. Alarm for the first time. That is not safe. Neither are you, Irena said, and hauled herself onto the catwalk that ran under the gym roof. Dust puffed off the railing like old prayers. The water tower outside hummed. The siren was silent again, holding its breath. The catwalk door to the roof was chained. Of course it was. A laminated sign with county letterhead read "Do not open, except for maintenance." The chain had a city padlock. Irena swore softly in a language that brought winter with it and fished in the pocket of her coat. Gray, she called down, not looking. Do you still keep the bad key? Gray's grin flashed like a coin in a magician's sleeve. He tossed. Something small and heavy. It arced under the lights. The kid caught it left-handed and passed it up. Irena snapped the shackle like a woman opening a jar for a child. The door went out into cold and a little sky. Wind knifed in. 30 seconds. Low wind breathed into Annalise's ear through the vent by the scoreboard. Annalise. Oates. Sighed. A warning lower than his badge number. She looked down at him. He was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for the math of it. Ladder plus bag plus men who loved a stage and a woman who had just climbed onto one. If I don't show them how to listen to me, she said, I will spend the rest of my life listening to them. He put her scarred wrist against a panel, the way Annalise had learned to do. The metal warmed. The locket warmed in reply. 2 hands. He swallowed the words he wanted to say and nodded once. Then do it clean. Annalise climbed about the roof was an old friend she didn't know she had. Gravel, tar, the kind of soft flex that tells a body it won't drop you unless you run. The water tower's humming was a physical thing you could lean your shoulder against. Irena put one palm to the puff. Metal skin, eyes closed. We woke it when we were children, she said. Not a story, a fact. They made us sing. Now it listens for our key. She looked at Annalise. You talk, I will say when to stop. Annalise took the locket out from under her sweater. The wind tried to eat the chain. She steadied it with her thumb so the metal lay against the scar. Heat moved from the locket into her chest and back into the locket like breath. Below, the gym murmured. Phones rose like winter birds. Ready, Low wind said, through a vent that should not have been able to speak on. A roof and did. Listeners. A Kling. Deerhaven Glasshouse friendly. Present. Present. The word made her mouth feel like a ribbon had been cut. She spoke to the air. Not long. The kind of length you can get into a footprint so the next person who steps there feels it. This is Annalise Cade, she said, and let both names live in it this time without flinching. I am not a program. I am not a shelf. If you have been waiting for me to repeat your phrases, you will keep waiting. If you have been waiting to be told it is safe to come home, it is not. It will never be. Come anyway or send your voice and I will meet it halfway. If you are listening to Invoice County, find another place to send your bill. Irena's fingers tightened on the tower skin and then relaxed. Cut, she said, and the tower obeyed. Behind them, the catwalk door banged. The glasshouse woman had made a choice she would regret later. She stepped onto the roof with two men who had taken off their jackets so their shoulder holsters would not print so politely. Ma'am, she said tightly, step away from the edge. Always good advice, Irena said, not moving. Kid had come as far as the threshold and stopped, body half in the doorway, making themselves the human version of a doorstop. Annalise tucked the locket under her sweater and turned. The wind braided hair into her mouth, and she spoke around it. You don't want to do this here, she told the glasshouse woman. If you make a mess on a roof, the whole town can see the stains when it doesn't rain. The woman stalled where her training had given her no script for metaphor. We are here to keep you safe, she said. No, Annalise said. You are here to keep a box safe from a person. I am the person. The box will do what it is told. By whom? One of the men asked, which was a mistake. By me, Irena said. And if the wind had a sound for, of course, it made it then. The door banged again. Holloway stepped out, a letter in his mouth he would never send. Do not point that weapon, he told the man on the right. Not because the man had drawn, but because a hand had twitched toward a habit. Tell your contractor to stand down. The glasshouse woman snapped. I don't employ him, Holloway said. No one does. That's his curse. 20 seconds, Low Wind whispered. Roof window, closed. Wash, open. Move, Irena said, and for the first time there was urgency in her voice. They will break your gym and call it a repair. We go now. They did because the choice had been made before it was offered. Down the catwalk. Into the heat. Into noise. The gin changed key when they appeared again. You can feel it when a room has decided to keep you alive. Phones tracked. Children hushed. The preacher-voiced man lost 1 millimeter of smile, and therefore $300 of dental worth. Cruz slid a door control with the red ring, and the bleachers began to fold with a groan. People moved, the way antelope moved together without rehearsal. The men in suits had to back up to avoid getting caught in benches that did not care about pensions. Space opened where there had been none. Out the East Hall, Oates said quietly. Luz, take people to the west. Make noise. Gray, go ahead and see if anyone is waiting in the kitchen, because of course they are. Always, Gray agreed. Already moving, they flowed. Flow is not the same as run. Flow puts friction where it belongs on the people trying to stop it. The kid took point in the hall, rifle low, not pointing at anyone, dangerous enough that a human brain took a step back without knowing why. Irena walked at Annalise's shoulder like a shadow that had learned to prefer light. Friendly is here. Low Wind hummed through a return vent by the trophy case, and for one stupid second, Annalise expected a young voice at her ear. Instead, it was the older one who met them at the door. He wore no suit and no badge and a cheap jacket that had been mended at the elbows. His hair had given up and gone gray without a fight. His eyes were the color of the part of the sky you don't look at when the sun is too much. He lifted his hands the way a man does when he knows the room has guns and he intends to leave with his ribs intact. Miss Cade, he said to Annalise. I'm Samuel Broad. You don't know me. I knew you when you were smaller. He tipped his head at Irena. And I have been trying to keep this one from driving across states to find you in person for years. Irena snorted. Liar, she said without malice. He drove me 3 of them. As Klein, Holloway said softly. And the man Broad shook his head. No, he said, and the no had weight. I left that desk when they tried to put a child on it and call that a fiscal year. He looked at the men in suits who had found them again, and now stood across the hall with expressions that meant this was getting annoying. You people do love a hallway, he observed mildly. You know who else loved hallways? The people who built this county's first courthouse. They still lost it when the river moved. Sir, the glasshouse woman said, you are not cleared for this scene. He smiled the dangerous smile of an uncle who has paid too many bail bonds and knows exactly which judge owes him a favor. Neither are you, he said. But here we are. He looked at Oates. Sheriff, if you walk your people out that door, my old colleagues will make you famous in a way I would rather you avoid. If you walk them down, I can make them hesitate for 6 minutes. In 6 minutes, your lady can decide whether to be a storm or a filing cabinet. Down where? Oates asked. The wash, Broad said simply. Where this belongs. The depot subnode is awake. It is the last thing that can be moved without closing the town for a year. Depot, low wind-breathed, delighted that someone was listening politely. Door, water, key, deputy. Cruz lifted the ring. I get to be famous? Not today, Oates said. Today you get to be subtle. Ooh, she said. Worst superpower. They turned as a unit, down a hallway that smelled like popcorn and cleaning fluid, and the sweat of games where the points mattered. And then didn't. The suits followed until the crowd became a net. Boys in jerseys stepped sideways without looking, forcing a path that wasn't a path. Grandmothers with clipboards crossed in front of men with urgent lanyards. The town saved its sheriff's time the way it saved rainwater. Careful, stubborn, without permission, out the east door. Across the baked dirt to the chain link that led to the municipal yard. Through it with a key that, until today, had meant salt and plows and summer baseball chalk lines. The wash waited like a mouth they had learned to kiss. Window at the depot, Low Wind said. Now. The path to the depot subnode was mean and unphotogenic. Concrete poured when the county had a grant and then forgot to ask for more. The door was a slab with a handle that looked like it belonged on a freezer. Cruz slid the red dot key into a slot that pretended not to exist, and the slab sighed open, the way a man does when he has been held to his word for too long. Inside, air that hadn't decided if it wanted to be cool. A table that was a twin to the one at Low Wind. A rack with old lenses and newer cables. A panel lit with the weak green of a thing that had only ever been turned off 10 times, and then reluctantly. Hello, Zayaznia, Irina said to the depot, naming it like a grandmother names a kitchen. Hello, the subnode said, trying English and landing on friendly. Deliverables, some. Listeners, many. Time? Halle asked. Short, the depot said. 6 minutes, then long. What does that mean? Oates demanded. It means if we don't make a choice, someone else makes it, Broad said. I can slow them 6 minutes. After that, they stop asking me for old passwords and start pretending to misdial while they cut the power. Gray went to the cables like a man meeting kittens. We can mirror to 3 places, he said. Water tower, siren, courthouse node. If we do it at half power, the town hears a hum and thinks the lights are old. And the listeners? Annalise asked. They hear a lullaby with all the words missing, Gray said. If we're lucky. If we're honest, Halle said. They hear an invitation. Then we invite who we want, Irina said. Not them, it's friendly, locked, the depot said. Handshake, ready. Annalise looked at Broad. You were the friendly, she said. He shook his head. I was one, he said. Not the one. You think I could keep her from finding you for 39 years by myself? He tipped his chin at Irina, affection. And room mingled like well-made coffee and the burn on your tongue afterward. What happens if I transmit? Annalise asked. You light a road, Irina said. Some will come who should. Some will come who shouldn't. Some will remember a promise they made to a child about being kind instead of good and try to keep it old. What happens if I burn? Irina closed her eyes briefly. You save a town for a season and lose something it built without being asked to. She looked at Halle. Tell her the third thing, Archive, he said. You hide it and hope the next you is braver. He spread his hands, the gesture of a man who has no bluff left. I don't have the right to tell you which is mercy. Nor do I, Broad said. I tried for years. It never made me sleep better. 3 minutes, the depot said. Friends, close. The word rearranged the room. Annalise had been tired since the wash. She became awake the way a deer is awake when the air tells it a cougar has laid down a shadow. She looked at the bag. She looked at Irina. She looked at Oates and Cruz and Luz, and the kid and the faces that would never know this room existed. She set the bag on the table. She took out the tape labeled Keys Partial. She took out Orientation because she wanted to keep the voice near her, not because she intended to play it. She placed her hand on the locket and felt the little heart of it answer the bigger one. I will not be your shelf, she told the room. And it wasn't language. It was a vow. Transmit? The depot asked. The door banged behind them. Men crowded it. Too many for a polite conversation. Not enough for a war. No one could survive. The preacher-voiced man lifted his hands as if remembering how to be a person. Stop, he said. Please, 2 minutes, the depot said. The siren up the hill, asleep, dreamed of 1963 again. Oates stepped forward. You don't have a warrant, he told the men, because he had to say the sentence out loud to remember what it felt like. You have a storm and a habit of thinking you belong wherever there are doors. We have a mandate, the glass house. Woman said. She didn't raise her voice. The room wasn't big enough for echo. We have signatures you will never see and a budget you will never vote on. Step aside. Or what? Cruz asked softly and took 1 step sideways so she stood directly in front of Annalise without making a banner out of her body. Or you lose jurisdiction over your own building, the woman said. Then the building can testify, Gray said. Lightly, hands on cables, eyes on nothing that mattered as much as these next seconds. The kid's finger found the trigger guard. They weren't pointing the rifle at anyone. But the room understood. Irina touched the panel. Transmit, friendly only, she said. Cannot, the depot said. Friendly plus 1 unknown will ride. Which unknown? Holly asked. The panel paused, which meant it had to lie or had to translate. ASH, it said finally. Or Klein, or both, Broad swore. It sounded like a prayer that had learned to fight. They piggybacked, he said. Of course they did. They trained half my cohort to do only that. Then we poison the bait, Gray said. We send them something that makes them choke without killing the fish we want. 40 seconds, the depot said, and there was something in its voice. Like sympathy. Annalise, Irina said, and the room got very small and very clear. It is yours. What do you choose? She could feel the town inside her, the paper cup blowing down Maine, the woman in the florist, the man in the bait shop, the kids in the gym. She could feel the people who would come on a road made of signal, carrying what they knew and what they didn't, wearing names like coats they hadn't had time to break in. She could feel the other thing too, the invoices, the hallways, the men who keep files like pets and eat children's magic for breakfast and call it work. She thought of the phrase that had woken the wash. She thought of the second phrase the man on the tape had not taught her, because all good men think they are halfway to saving a child by withholding the worst. She leaned to the panel and said, very clearly, transmit. Orientation only, strip headers. No route for Ash. If Klein hears it, let her choke. Copy, the depot said, almost cheerful. Sending, 1 minute, stripping, done. Headers, salt. Listeners, many. The glasshouse woman took a step in, paying for boldness with a breath she couldn't spare. Stop this, she said. You don't understand the scale. Ma'am, Oates replied, the scale can kiss my badge. The depot hummed. The lights flickered and held. The siren did not sound. The water tower sang nothing anyone with ears could name. Miles away, in a room with white floors and a coffee machine that cost more than Oates' truck, a printer spat a sheet that said only orientation and a single line of text that would make a woman with a bored seat say a word. In a language she had paid to forget. In Garnet Ridge, in a concrete room that remembered other secrets, a man with white teeth reached under his jacket and finally made the mistake his training had told him not to. The kid fired first. The bullet took the man's gun hand. It spanged off the freezer handle behind him with a sound like a bell trying to get married. Cruz didn't flinch. Holly moved right, Gray left, Oates forward. The glasshouse woman clamped down on her own men with a look that said if they breathed wrong, she would take it from them later. Transmission complete. The depot said calmly, as if someone had not just tried to reset the day with a hole. Then, the lights went out. It wasn't a failure. Failures have shame in them. This was a hand. It was the county power company taking a call from someone who had learned to say, please, in turning a key because it had been told that was what kept everything neat. The room did not go black. The emergency lights came up in red. The locket heated against Annalise's bone until she wanted to cry from simple sensation. Burn? The depot asked in the sudden red quiet. Archive? Sleep? Sirens in the distance, not the old civil defense throat, but the new ones, the ambulances, the volunteer firemen who are teachers on weekdays and lightning on the weekends. The town was coming to witness its own life being negotiated. None. Annalise said, we leave it awake. Broad blew out a breath he'd probably been holding for a decade. Then we leave, he said. Before the men who fix things get orders to unfix us. Where? Cruz asked. The one place in town no one thinks is worth anything, Irina said. The old depot cafe. The rail line died, and the coffee went with it. There's a door under the walk-in. Gray blinked. Of course there is, he said, delighted. Tell me there's pie that makes a mockery of men. There was, Irina said. We will settle for dryness. They moved. There is a way. A group moves when it has chosen not to be prey. It looks like a school of fish and a marching band and a funeral, all at once. Oates took point with Cruz and the kid in their good gun sense. Broad and Holly bracketed the mess, Annalise in the messenger bag, and the names that had started to weigh enough to bend a spine. Gray ghosted the edges. Irina walked at Annalise's shoulder and did not say the word mother because it would not fit in this room. Outside, the dust had decided it was evening. The men with white teeth had lost their advantage and knew it, and were trying to remember how to win without it. The town had its phones up and its eyebrows raised like a choir. It didn't take sides, it took notes. It would bake them into a casserole later and bring it to the house that needed it most. They reached the cafe without being stopped, which meant the town had intervened in 20 small ways that would go unthanked. A truck parked wrong. A door held longer than necessary. A question asked loudly about irrigation that made a man look away from a woman he wanted to handcuff without a warrant. The cafe was what a building becomes when it has remembered, too. Many mornings, stubborn, square, cheap glass in the windows. And a bell on the door that sometimes rings when no one comes in. The walk-in was a coffin in the back hall. The door under it was a hinge in the floor. Cruz used the red ring and an older key that had been kept in a coffee can since the previous sheriff learned to like cinnamon. The hinge complained. The air from below was cooler than a room should be on a day like this. Go, Oates said, and the kid went first, because of course they did. They were halfway down when the building above them changed its mind about being safe. Boots on tile, voices raised. The glasshouse woman, sharp as a paper cut. The preacher voice, reasonable as a paycheck. And a third voice not Broad's, younger than Broad's, familiar in its cadence like a hymn someone hums while washing dishes. The voice said, Annalise, and made the locket sear like a command. She knew it before she turned, because name said right will make the body turn by itself. She looked up. In the rectangle of the walk-in door, haloed by bad fluorescent light and a worse decision, stood the woman from the dust. The coat was off. The scar on her wrist was visible. The ring around her eyes made the storm in them permanent. "I was too late," the woman said softly, and the softness made the room cruel. "I should have come sooner." She moved past the glasshouse woman as if the other were furniture. "I am Mila," she said in a voice that had learned to lower itself in rooms where children sleep lightly. "Mila Kuspzak. I named you. It was not a question. It was not a claim." Irina stiffened beside Annalise, as if her body wanted to. "Hold the whole hallway up by itself. Do you remember me?" Mila asked, and the question was a mercy. She did not say daughter. She did not say forgive me. She gave the name like a stone to step on across a river. Annalise's mouth did. The thing mouths do when they want to say 3 words at once and cannot decide which one to let out first. Her throat closed and opened and closed like a door that doesn't fit its frame. She could smell varnish and dust and an old lemon cleaner that never quite left the building even after the manager retired. Behind Mila, the men with white teeth had made themselves small in the presence of women who were not impressed by the number of zeros on their cards. Behind Oates, Cruz had her hand on the rail and was looking down as if trying to memorize the order in which the feet ahead of her were moving. Mila took 1 step closer. "If you come with me," she said, "I can take you to a place where your name is not an argument." She lifted her palm, showing it empty. "If you do not, I will still stand between you and the invoice." Irina's breath came sharp. "You don't get to stand in front of her," she said. "Not yet." "I do not want to," Mila said, and the honesty cracked something in the floor. "I want to walk beside." Her eyes went to the messenger bag. "What is in there belongs to you, not to me, not to them." She didn't look at the glasshouse woman, who was losing patience in layers like paint. 30 seconds until someone loses their nerve, Gray said cheerfully from the bottom of the stairs. "Because sometimes the truth makes you move better than fear does." Annalise held the bag strap in one hand and her own pulse in the other. She thought of the ledger pencil on her desk. She thought of the town at the bottom of the wind. She thought of how many times today she had chosen a door because a room asked her to. "Choose me," Mila said softly, and the word me sounded like a boat pushed off a bank without a rope. Annalise opened her mouth, and the floor shuddered as if the building remembered a railroad and a timetable and decided to keep both. The emergency lights went out. The locket burned. A voice spoke from the vents under the walk-in in a tone it had not used all day. The sound of a thing that had waited 39 years to say 1 sentence and had finally been given permission. "Agent 39, the depot said. "Birth name confirmed." The word that came next fit into Annalise's ear like a blade, and somewhere above them a gun went off. The stair rail snapped under someone's hand. The bag's weight shifted. The dust in her mouth tasted not like pennies, but like blood. She turned toward the sound before she knew she had moved. She did not yet know whether the word "the depot" had said was a salvation or a sentence. She did not yet know whose blood the dust had borrowed. She did know that the next step she took would be the one that made her a person men had to reckon with for the rest of their lives. She moved.